Chapter 520. At dawn the next day, Panduola and Hephaestus left the capital in a carriage. They planned to take the magic car to the town outside the Shungmalian Academy, before deciding on their next itinerary. From the news leaked by the Duke's mansion, the two had already guessed that the Holy Church was about to make a big move. If they didn't leave the capital, it might cause unnecessary trouble for the Duke's mansion. "Don't look, they've already left." Claire poked Dake's face and reminded him. Dake took a breath of the freshest air of the day and said, "Then let's begin our experiment." After a night of thinking, Dake had more guesses about the origin of the underworld fire. According to the common understanding of the underworld, after a person died and entered the underworld, the consciousness in the soul would be gradually erased after a long period of wandering. But matter and energy were conserved. Nothing would disappear into thin air. Remember the website, Mvvipkanshu. 6. The so-called erasure of consciousness was very likely to be stripped and transformed into something else. For example, the underworld fire? Dake believed that the complete underworld fire should be a collection of consciousness. Perhaps they would be divided into different categories due to their different tendencies and fuse into a huge body of consciousness that was not called underworld fire. But the possibility of such a huge body of consciousness was very high, and the gray flame in Dake's hand was a small part of it. Regardless of whether it was true or not, he needed to confirm the basic nature of the underworld fire through experiments. Only by understanding it could he restrain it. And now, there was a ready-made method to understand it. At the same time, he could also see how much control he had over the underworld fire. Not long after, Dake was ready in the laboratory. Experiment staff: Dake Diming Experiment Assistant, Claire Kate Experiment Logistics, Ollie Diming Experiment Audience, Yelvet Saint Diming Experiment Audience, Aurora Montiervery Experiment Material. Underworld Fire. Angus Jeffrey had once used a spell he obtained from the underworld fire to create 2 underworld steels. Now that Dake had obtained the rights to the underworld flame, he naturally obtained the curse as well. From Angus Jeffrey's memories, he even obtained the method to compile the spell. Otherwise, with Dake's current mastery of the arcane language, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to compile the spell in real time. Sometimes, the same incantation can result in completely different results when compiled by different people using different magical languages. Claire carefully checked the coding method that Dake had copied down and said, "There's no problem with this coding method. Just follow it." Dake nodded and immediately began to compile the spell. As for Yvette and Aurora, they sat by the side drinking tea. Half an hour later, Dake completed the preliminary compilation of the spell. He then continued to test and debug the compiled spell according to Angus Jeffrey's method. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he finally finished all the debugging. "Next, I'll use this spell as the foundation to create a spell card." From the compilation of the spell to using the underworld fire as the core material to create the spell card, it was a process of fully understanding the spell. Dake took out a pipette and tried to extract a tube of flame from the underworld fire. The underworld fire had a very strange nature. Not only did it not release heat, but it also did not consume fuel. It gave people the feeling that it was not a flame, but a soul-like substance in the shape of a flame. Therefore, although it looked like it was burning, it was actually shaking. On the whole, it was divided into 2 parts. One part was the core like a small flame, and the other part was the flame outside the core. The core was difficult to extract and stored memories, magic, and other substances. The flame outside the core was like skin and hair. After being extracted, it could be regenerated. Angus Jeffrey's Underworld Monument was created by using the flame outside the core as the material. Therefore, Dake also extracted a tube of flame and used it as the ink to write the spell. He began to create the spell card. In fact, it was not difficult to create the spell card this time. Whether it was the compilation of the spell or the collection of other materials, they were all in the category of relatively simple. The overall difficulty was probably lower than the flicker spell. He was able to create a spell card like the Underworld Monument because of the uniqueness of the underworld fire. In order to observe and test the underworld fire in detail during the process of creating the card, Dake deliberately slowed down the speed of the process. However, when it was about 10:30 a.m., he still managed to complete the refinement. This was the first time he used the underworld fire, and the process was very smooth. It was just like the situation when Angus Jeffrey was creating the card in the memory fragment. According to Angus Jeffrey's memory, the success rate would be very low from the second time onwards. He used almost a whole week to create the second underworld monument. After that, he realized that he could not succeed anymore. The underworld fire was almost bald because of him. He had to rely on continuous duels to replenish the nutrients for it to grow again. Dake had no mercy for the underworld fire. So he was prepared to make it bald too. Is the creation a success just like that? Aurora asked curiously as she carefully observed the magic card lying quietly on the table. Yes, the basic magic card creation is actually not complicated. You will come into contact with it more frequently when you go to school. Dake used a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card and rinsed it in the sink before putting it back on the table. Everyone's gazes gathered. The edges of this magic card were suffused with a faint light, like a gray flame, while the base color of the card was pitch black. If one stared at the pitch black, they would have the illusion that they would be sucked in. On top of the pitch black background, a rusty gray collar lay quietly. The surface of the collar was engraved with vague flame-like patterns. A silver-gray iron chain that was thicker and longer than the collar stretched out from the buckle. At the end of the iron chain was a handshake ring. Isn't this the underworld monument? Dake frowned slightly and was a little disappointed. Angus Jeffrey's underworld monument was very useful. The underworld shackle, that could bind the moon goddess, was a very powerful combo skill. But the magic card creation was like that. The characteristics of the magus would always have different degrees of influence on the creation of the card. The final result of the creation would also be different. Claire poked his face and reminded him, "Don't just stand there. What magic card is this?" Dark answered. He then picked up the magic card and injected a trace of magic power into it. The collar on the card glowed, and some information was transmitted to Dake's mind through the magic power. He thought for a moment and said, "Underworld Soul Ring, a magic card that can summon a soul collar. It seems that the effect of the spell is very likely to be binding." A binding spell? Claire rested her chin on her hand and thought. Then what's the use of your Underworld Soul Ring? Let me see. Dake continued to inject magic power and analyzed the magic card in his hand. After a moment, a smile appeared on his face. Not bad. Underworld Soul Ring, a necklace that summons souls. Bind the opponent's soul and drag it to the abyss of the underworld as a sacrifice to the god of the underworld. A magic card that can bind the opponent's magic fairy and turn it into a sacrifice. It has a wide range of applications. But for now there might be a limit to the strength of the binding. It's most likely that it can only turn a first-tier magic fairy into a sacrifice. If it's a second-tier fairy, it will only have a certain degree of binding effect. Dake continued to inject magic power, and then used a normal summoning spell. Soon the Underworld Soul Ring was summoned. Tools like this that relied on magic spell cards to summon were actually the manifestation of magic power. They were a form of magic manifestation, and not a real tool. Angus Jeffrey's Underworld Steel was the same. However, when the Archmage categorized this type of magic card, they would sometimes categorize it as an item card. Just like the Holy Sword Curse, it was both a magic card and an item card. After summoning the Underworld Soul Ring, Dake subconsciously looked for the little devil. After a short pause, he remembered that the little devil was still studying hard. Claire carefully observed the collar in Dake's hand and said, "It's similar to my beast trapping hoop. However, although my beast trapping hoop is stronger, it can only catch birds and beasts." Then she thought for a while and said, "Jeffrey can increase his strength by refining 2 underworld steels. Maybe you can do the same?" Dake looked at the flames on the underworld fire, that were still quite full, and thought, "I can give it a try." After having an idea, Dake immediately began the second round of refining. But until 9 o'clock in the evening, when all the flames outside the core of the underworld fire were stripped bare, he still couldn't refine the second magic card. As for Claire and Yalvet, they had already left during the day. Although it wasn't convenient for them to reveal the details of the underworld fire, they could still increase their vigilance and strictly investigate crimes to reduce the danger. Thus, only Aurora Monteer-Folly was left by Dake's side. But to Aurora, the whole process was equivalent to the feeling of a primary school student watching a university student do an experiment. Dong dong dong. Katja. Olga walked in with pastries and tea. After putting the tray on the table, she asked, "How is it? Is there a result?" Dake smiled helplessly. "No result, but it's over." With that said, he put down all the things in his hands and asked Aurora to clean up the remnants of the experiment. The simplest way to replenish the external flames of the underworld fire was to duel with someone. But dueling with someone was bound to take risks. Even if he won, it would bring pain to his opponent. This was completely contrary to the vision of using duels to bring smiles to others. And Dake wasn't sure if he could start a dark duel. After all, he wasn't possessed by the underworld fire. If that's the case, then I can only wait for the underworld fire to grow on its own. Every time it grows, I'll cut it. Every time it grows, I'll cut it. Dake poked the underworld fire, that was only the size of a walnut, with his fingertips. Suddenly he had an idea. He reached out and grabbed it into his palm. Then he infused his palm with magic power and closed his fingers. He actually pressed the underworld fire under the skin of his palm. When he stopped, the underworld fire was already completely hidden in his palm. The next day, on Monday, it started to drizzle in the royal capital in the wee hours of the morning. Alvette and Claire left the Duke's mansion early in the morning. After Dake finished his morning exercise, he didn't put too much effort into the underworld fire. Instead, he began to study the transformation spell and fill in the teaching materials for mathematics too. Not long after, Deanna returned with Camilla and rejoined the Army of Learning. But because the armed combat lesson wasn't reopened, she spent most of her time self-studying and doing summer homework. However, the growth of an archmage was extremely dependent on self-study. Relying on one's own efforts to understand and grasp more knowledge was much better than being forced to learn. In the process of self-study, an archmage could train their ability to explore and research to the greatest extent. This was very important for an archmage. At the same time, Aurora also borrowed the first-year textbook from Dake and joined the army of self-study. The learning atmosphere in the Duke's mansion became even more intense. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. Dake finally finished writing and adjusting the transformation spell on Sunday night. He knocked on Claire's door with uncontrollable excitement. This week, Claire had been busy preparing for the establishment of the Archmage Society. She didn't know much about this area, so she needed to cram in. But when Dake occasionally paid attention, he would see a satisfied smile on her face. Maybe this is the feeling of finding a goal. Dake thought as he slightly increased the strength of his knocking. Katja! The door suddenly opened, and a lion's round face appeared. Dake walked into the room as if he was used to it. He smiled and said, "Good evening, Aunt Claire." "Good evening, Dake." Claire replied casually, but her tone was obviously annoyed. Dake asked curiously, "Aunt Claire, what's bothering you?" Claire frowned and said, "I'm thinking, what should I name the society?" "So you're thinking of a name?" Dake could not help but show an empathetic expression. "I'm also very bad at naming. Until now, I haven't decided on the names of the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter." Claire said casually, "One will be called Olivia, and the other will be called Phoenix." Dake could not help but pause, and then he really began to think about it. Olivia was the alias of the Blood Princess, Ophelia Bullard. Although the vampire's daughter was no longer related to her, she was still a magical fairy that had been refined to save her. Therefore, the relationship between them could not be severed. Olivia was indeed a very nice name. As for Phoenix, it also meant phoenix in this world. Naturally, it was the most suitable name. In the end, he only needed to give them the surname of Dimung. Claire turned to look at him and said lazily, "The entrance exam is on August 15th. We need to leave 2 days in advance. Their IDs also need to be registered in advance. You'd better decide quickly." "Okay." Dake took a deep breath. "Then I'll ask for their opinions tomorrow." But the blood bag of the vampire's daughter? I already have a plan for that. Claire smiled. On the eve of the Demon King's execution ceremony, we destroyed an evil cult's lair and seized something interesting. I'll give it to you after their trial is over. That's good. The heavy burden that had been weighing on Dark's heart was finally lifted. Claire turned her eyes and said, So, can you help me think of a name for our club? Dake walked to Claire's side, thanked Monkey who had brought the table, and sat down. Then he said, Since the main body of the society is the Magister, why don't we call it the Dake Magister Society? Claire rolled her eyes and said, Then we might as well call it the Claire Magister Society. Anyway, although I've decided to only recruit Magisters as core members, it's best not to be so obvious in the name. After all, most ordinary people have the same impression of Magisters and sorcerers. They feel mysterious and reverent at the same time. It's not good for the society's promotion among the ordinary people. I'm just kidding. Dake thought for a moment and said, Then, how about the International Projection Society? Since our main goal is to make profits and development, it's not a bad choice to directly highlight projection. International. Claire said, Are you planning to expand your business into the market of other races? Dake said seriously, Of course. Since we're going to build it, naturally we have to build a world-class society. At least, that's the goal. Claire couldn't help but stroke her hair and said, You're thinking even further than I am. But we're only a 2-member society now. Dake couldn't help but laugh. How can there be only 2 members? What do you think of Eve and Aaron? Claire frowned slightly and said, Eve and Aaron, are they the twin sisters under Chris? Dake nodded. That's right, it's them. If a company wants to expand, it's necessary to gather intelligence. We can't always rely on the intelligence from the Duke's residence. It's always right to reserve an intelligence department in advance. Besides, the magic they have is very useful. If we really want to do the business of dual plates and cards, we have to keep in touch with the Academy at all times. Claire, you mean? Dake curled the corner of his mouth and said, Even Aaron can leave one person behind in Traveler's Street. In this case, it would be very convenient for him. After Claire realized the key point, she looked at him meaningfully and said, On the 15th, I'll go to the Academy with you. We'll discuss it in detail with Professor Shi-Erfu. Although the Academy definitely won't reject this kind of suggestion, they won't necessarily give in. Dake blinked and said, Then why don't we pull Janice into our society too? A good public relations department is also important for a large society. Anyway, Janice has nothing to do in the residence. Claire shook her head with a smile. My original intention of founding the society is to help our vet better. Besides, how can you steal your mother's men like that? Dake let out a hollow laugh. What about Teacher Cyrus? Claire shook her head again. He's old. Dake, that's true. Claire took a deep breath and said, Let's leave it at that. Eve and Eve together can barely be considered a magister. That makes 4 of us. As for the name of the society, I'll think about it. Have you finished debugging the transformation spell? Only then did Dark remember his purpose for coming here. He took out the half-finished transfiguration spell and said, Yes, I think I can try to inscribe the spell into this magic card. Claire nodded. Then let's begin. To be honest, I've been curious about what kind of animal you'll become for a long time. Dake shrugged and said, What else can I become? In short, I'll be an animal like a cat or a dog. Actually, I'm more interested in becoming a fish or a bird. One can go into the water, and the other can fly. But considering that fish can't move on the ground, birds are better. Maybe an amphibious one would work too. As Dake spoke, he suddenly realized that Claire's gaze was a little strange. It was as if she was looking at Doraemon. He shuddered subconsciously and quickly refocused his attention on the magic card in his hand. This half-finished, transfiguration spell only needed to be written with a specific ink to complete the spell before it could be completed. Dark had already adjusted the magic potion that acted as the ink. He injected it into the axis of the magic pen, and then wrote a magic spell on the paper as practice. Then he activated the magic card with his magic, and began to write the magic spell in the square box that appeared. In just 3 minutes, he had finished writing the curse. Nearly 2 weeks of hard work was all focused on these 3 minutes. Fortunately, there were no mistakes in the end. Dake checked it carefully and smiled with anticipation. Then he waited for the spell to gradually integrate into the magic card and stimulate the internal circuit to operate. After waiting patiently for about 5 minutes, the internal reaction of the transformation spell finally stopped. It should be a success. Before he picked it up to check, Claire said directly. Dake sighed in relief and asked, "If I use the transformation spell, will it transform my clothes as well?" Claire nodded. "This one of yours should be, but the range is still limited. You can't wear clothes that are too thick." "Then there's no problem." Dake couldn't help but smile. Then he picked up the transformation spell and couldn't wait to cast the usual summoning spell. 3-in-1/6/100 plus 138/233 babies. It's the end of the month. Cast your minimum monthly votes and blades. 3. Also, from today until July 3rd, every chapter has to be manually reviewed before it can be displayed. So, there will be a delay of a few hours. As for the lack of time, asterisk. See, greater than sign. Chapter 521. Before the transformation spell, obtain the transformation data. There was only a cloud of mist on the card surface. Dake held the transformation spell in his hand, and his lips moved quickly. With the successful casting of the usual summoning spell, the cloud of mist drilled out of the card surface and wrapped him up in the blink of an eye. As for his body, it was within this cloud of mist that he underwent a drastic change. The overall feeling was somewhat similar to the transformation during the armed evolution. But it was also different. Dake's mind moved, and he closed his eyes, carefully sensing the changes in his body. He could feel that his body was becoming smaller, which was not surprising. Most of the transformation spells could not break through the body size and weight of an individual. Generally, they would only become smaller and lighter, but not bigger and heavier. As his body rapidly became smaller, more and more subtle sounds suddenly drilled into his ears, and some unidentifiable smells became clearer. He gradually opened his eyes, and his gaze passed through the thinning smoke. He saw more things that he could not normally see, and even the dark corners suddenly became clear. Hearing, smell, and vision have all been strengthened. The convenience of the transformation spell was here. 1 second to remember. https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. Most animals, in terms of hearing, smell, and vision, were more sensitive than humans. And after putting on the harmless skin, they could obtain many conveniences that humans could not obtain. When the smoke completely disappeared, the final transformation was completed. Dake raised his head slightly and saw Claire, who had become huge. He thought about what he had become, and was about to ask, "Meow." But as soon as he opened his mouth, he realized that there was no need to ask anymore. "Did I become a cat?" Dake suddenly frowned, and an extremely bad feeling arose in his heart. Then he abruptly took a step back. Even though it was his first time walking on all fours, his consciousness seemed to have been engraved in the genes of his body, allowing him to complete a perfect backward jump smoothly. Then Claire grabbed the back of his neck. "Meow." Dake suddenly let out a scream, and the shadow of his childhood suddenly appeared. Of all things to become, he actually became a cat. He suddenly raised his head, and indeed in Claire's eyes he saw a ferocious gaze as if looking at prey. At the age of 6, because he tore Claire's book, he was turned into a cat by the angry Claire on the spot. From that moment on, a forbidden window opened in Claire Kate's world. The poor little Dake had become a punching bag for the Sage of the Beasts, to vent its stress for a long time. Every time Claire was in a bad mood, she would cast a transformation spell on him. What was even more frightening was that Yvette, who usually listened to everything he said, had actually formed an alliance with Claire in this regard. She ignored his protests and often held cat-stroking tea parties with Claire. Now that the past had become the wind, the memories of his childhood should have been scattered with the wind. But why did this damn transformation spell turn into a cat of all things? Dake instantly lost his desire to investigate further. He swore in his heart that he would seal this transformation spell under the dust. At least in front of Claire, he absolutely couldn't use it a second time. After that, he immediately tried to remove the transformation spell. However, he failed. I forgot to tell you that this transformation spell is the most basic type and there's no option to remove it. Every time you transform, you can only wait until the effect of the spell disappears, Claire said casually. Meow. Dake braced himself and asked. Claire lifted him onto her knees and pinched his paws. 30 minutes. It can only last for 30 minutes at most. The exact duration depends on the magical power you inject during the summoning. In other words, it was controllable to a certain extent. Dake understood instantly. Then he spread his limbs and gave up resisting completely. 30 minutes later, Claire washed up and went to bed with a satisfied expression. On the other hand, Dake left her room in exhaustion. After returning to his room, he informed Olga, who was still guarding the door, about bringing Eve and Aaron here. Then, he entered the bathtub and soaked himself completely in the hot water. This week of high-intensity homework had made him very tired. Now that he had finally achieved a small goal, he needed to relax. After he finished his bath and prepared for bed, the transformation spell as cooldown was finally over. As expected, the cooldown for this transformation spell was an entire hour after the summoning. Dake came before the full-length mirror and used the transformation spell again to turn himself into a cat. Although he didn't intend to do too much research, he still wanted to know what kind of cat he was and what he looked like. When he was in Claire's room, he didn't have the time to check it all, so he could only return to his room and do it himself. Meow. But just as he transformed and turned his vision to the full-length mirror, an excited cry came from behind him. Then, Fairy Evie flew down from her little bed as if she had grown wings. Dake's face darkened. He immediately raised his paws and sternly refused her approach. Meow meow meow. Fairy Evie. Meow meow meow. Dake. Meow meow meow. Fairy Evie. Meow meow meow. Dake meow. Woo. Although Fairy Evie looked like a cat, it wasn't a cat. And Dake found that he didn't understand cat language at all. Even if he turned into a cat, he was still a human. Therefore, the two sides couldn't communicate at all. But fortunately, he never hid his research from the magic guide elves, so all the magic guide elves knew that he was researching the transformation spell, and didn't cause confusion because he suddenly turned into a cat. He looked at himself in the mirror and sighed. How can I be a ragdoll? Even if I turned into a cat, it should be a noble Persian cat or a strong mane cat. Even a random dragonly would be good. Forget it, it's good enough that I'm not a Scottish fold. The cat in the mirror had long white fur, sky-blue eyes like clear lake water, and a V-shaped face like a beauty. Because they were so beautiful, ragdolls were often called fairy cats. The larger ragdolls had long and beautiful fur, and their bodies were especially loose and soft, like soft ragdolls. Most ragdolls were more lazy, peaceful, and friendly. They could also be said to be gentle and quiet. Their meows were very sweet, and people couldn't help but want to hug them. Dake transformed into a ragdoll, and his ears were black, which made him look even more luxurious. He endured Fairy Evie's enthusiasm for a few minutes, and then he found that the cat plants were also attracted. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, and hurriedly ran into the study. Although the study couldn't stop Fairy Evie, it could at least separate the cat plants. After waiting for half an hour, Dake returned to his human form, and he grabbed Fairy Evie and violently stroked him, trying to take revenge. But his revenge was clearly not painful. Fairy Evie meowed rather comfortably. So much so that the Dilu beast and the other magic guide elves looked at him differently. Fairy Evie, great victory. After the research on the transformation spell was finished, Dake temporarily focused all his attention on the compilation of Mathematics 2. He gradually entered the zone, and the progress of the compilation became faster and faster. If nothing unexpected happens, I should be able to smoothly finish it before August 10th. On the night of July 31st, Dake put down his pen and revealed a smile. Regarding the compilation of the mathematics textbook, from the very beginning, he wrote it for credits, but now he developed a faint sense of responsibility. It was as if he was leading the generation, and he didn't feel tired while compiling. But tonight, he needed some time to do the end of the month summary. because he had obtained too much pride this month. Even if he drew a large amount of pride, the index of pride was still high. In addition, his addiction to milk tea and frequent big meals also increased his gluttony. Other than that, he needed to pay special attention to fury. After being affected by the god's fury during the Demon King execution ceremony, fury was increasing, but it was also gradually becoming harder to control. So much so that when he was in the second duel with Angus Jeffrey, it also triggered the growth of fury. Now the 7 indexes were as follows: pride 94, envy 44, fury 86, sloth 66, greed 93, gluttony 80, bliss 93. The data in front of him had even exceeded the initial value. Dake carefully looked at the indicators displayed by the system, and his eyebrows gradually deepened. Then he took out his notebook and looked at the initial value of the demon god system. Pride 92, envy 39, fury 93, sloth 71, greed 72, gluttony 52, bliss 72. Why do I feel like an entire year's worth of hard work has been wasted? After comparing the two lists, Dake couldn't help but touch his forehead. Compared to the initial value at the beginning of September last year, the 7 indexes had all increased. If this happened back then, he would have been scared out of his wits. But now he could calmly look at it. Now that I compare, I know that only fury and sloth are still dropping. Did I slack off too much? Dake couldn't help but ask himself. Just as he was worried at the beginning, the comfortable life after returning home made him gradually lose his sense of urgency. Every month he could reduce great sins by 15 points, and it also made him gradually forget about the consequences of not having self-control. But in reality, he was still dancing on the edge of danger. I need to reorganize my thoughts. Dake picked up his pen. As of now, pride has accumulated 26 points, bliss has 5 points, and greed is left with 4 points. Out of these 3, only greed is the easiest to control. If you want to study the other great sins, maybe you should lower greed first. Having 3 sins over 90 points is already very dangerous, so it's best to keep it within 3 points. Now that I've almost finished researching greed, I have 93 points of greed, and I can draw it twice. Combined with the remaining 4 points, I have 7 points. After using these 7 points to cultivate the fruit of greed, I can use them to refine the fruit-gnawing bug. After that, I need to control greed. The next new research target will be either rage or gluttony, Kieran said. In short, I need to draw at least 3 points of greed and 4 points of pride in August. 1 fruit-gnawing bug is enough. If I successfully refine it, I might need to use the fruit of bliss for the next one. I can't waste it. Also, refining a few more bliss magic elves will be good for the moon god armament. If that's the case, I'll draw greed twice, pride thrice, and bliss thrice. A total of 7 draws, and there are 3 extra draws. In short, I'll start with greed. Dake wrote down the August plan in his notebook, put down his pen temporarily, and thought carefully. There were still many things he needed to do in August. First, he had to compile all of Mathematics 2. Then he had to refine 2 magic elves. Then he had to experiment with pride. Even if he knew that he would fail, he had to try. If he didn't try, he might never be able to cross this hurdle. Other than that, Yvette had once said that she would bring him to the Tower of Ares in early August. The Tower of Ares, also known as the God of War Pagoda, was a sacred place for armed duels. However, it seemed that Yvette couldn't find the time. Dake wasn't very interested in the Tower of Ares either. Compared to summoning fists to attack, he was more inclined towards magic duels. Moreover, his chakras had stopped progressing after opening 3. Even if he practiced diligently every day, he didn't know when he would be able to open the 4th chakra. With just 3 meridians, even if he had the best armed card, it would be difficult for him to gain a foothold in the Tower of Ares. Moreover, among the armed card in his hands, only the moon god armament could be used, and it only lasted for 15 minutes. Therefore, after careful consideration, he was prepared to postpone the trip to the God of War Pagoda indefinitely. As for Yvette's opinion, Dake was very clear about Yvette's motive. She was afraid that he would become a brave warrior, and bear the brave warrior's destiny, so she wanted to train him. However, only he knew very well that anyone could become a brave warrior, except him. Therefore, Yvette's worries were unnecessary from the start. It was just that from his standpoint, it was difficult to explain this matter clearly. Moreover, he was still interested in physical training and armed combat training, so he cooperated with Yvette's plan. However, after cooperating for so long, it was time to stop. Dake grabbed the pen and spun it. If he didn't waste time on the Tower of Ares, he could better allocate the remaining time. Yes, apart from the above matters, there were still many things that he needed to do. After August 10th, it would be the real start of his busy schedule. In the blink of an eye, it was August. The weather in the royal capital was still hot, and there were no signs of autumn. Dake found time to look for Yvette, and used the reason that he needed time to write mathematics too, to postpone the trip to the God of War pagoda. Then, after 2 nights of absorbing, he finally gathered 7 points of greed again. However, this time, he was very calm. Therefore, he didn't start refining the magic guide sprite that night. Instead, he cultivated the flower of greed first and waited until the next morning to cultivate the fruit of greed. After that, he plucked the fruit of greed from the top of the dragon grass and cut off the remaining stem of greed. Then he summoned Kettle during class and squeezed the fruit of greed dragon into juice. After everything was ready, Dark started to refine the fruit-gnawing bug again. First he killed the dragon worm fruit. Then he used a special method to activate the magic inside the dragon worm fruit. This time, Dake summed up the experience of failure and prepared to use the remaining green dragon worm fruit and red dragon worm fruit. The fruit-eating bug was a special Pokemon that could evolve into apple-wrapping dragon by using sour apple, and sweet apple could evolve into honey dragon. When Dake was thinking about refining it, he divided the 2 types of evolution. He thought that using the green dragon worm fruit as the core would allow him to refine a fruit-eating bug that could evolve into apple-wrapping dragon, while using the red dragon worm fruit as the core would allow him to refine a fruit-eating bug that could evolve into honey dragon. However, he ended up refining Little Snorlax. Although this was due to the randomness of the basic refining method. However, when it came to probabilities, in the absence of sufficient data as a sample, it was just a matter of speculation. The real reason for the deviation in the refining process was very likely to be because of the core material. The fruit-eating bug was actually a type of Pokemon that was similar to Ivan, in that it had 2 types of evolution potential. If it was divided from the beginning, it would be equivalent to stripping away another type of potential. The fruit-eating bug, refined that way, would definitely be incomplete. In other words, Dake's train of thought was wrong. For the second refinement, he reorganized his train of thought and decided to use 2 dragon worm fruits to refine it together. With sufficient preparation, Dake quickly began the official refining experiment. He did not do anything unnecessary, other than using an extra dragon worm fruit. The entire refining process was exactly the same as the last time. After only half an hour, he had completed all the refining steps. As the last bit of material was put in, the light emitted from the number 1 refining formation went from the limit to the limit and calmed down in a breath's time. When the magic card was wrapped in the light cocoon, Dake patiently waited for 5 minutes until the light cocoon's internal reaction completely stopped. Only then did he pick up the mercury knife and cut the light cocoon along the center line. The magic light that shot out from the cut made him squint his eyes. Like most magic refinements, the impurities that were not absorbed by the magic card turned into a black liquid and were expelled from the body. Dake had already prepared a towel and quickly wiped the viscous liquid that flowed out. Then he covered his right hand with the towel, picked up the magic card and rinsed it in the sink. As the black substance stuck on the magic card was washed off, a faint orange halo emerged from the inside. This meant that the magic card was not a gold card, but an orange card. Dake was not disappointed. A gold card usually meant that there must be a supermodel's ultimate skill among the 4 ultimate skills. However, this did not mean that there could not be similar ultimate skills among the orange cards. Moreover, the fruit-eater bug was just a useless big apple before it evolved if the refining was successful. Therefore, under normal circumstances, he should leave the expectation for its evolved form. At least for now, using Greed 3 would definitely make it evolve. He just did not know what form it would evolve into. Dake was thinking while he did the final rinsing of the magic card. When the impurities on the card were washed off, the array of the magic card was finally revealed. This time, there was no accident. He had indeed refined a fruit-eater bug. There was a hint of excitement in Dake's eyes, but he quickly controlled his emotions. He first wiped the water stains on the magic card, then sat down and looked at it slowly. He was the only one in the huge laboratory. It was a pity that he could not share his joy with others. Dake could not help but miss the little monsters that were always by his side. It was a good thing that the magic elves were obsessed with their studies, but as their master, sometimes he would feel lonely. Dake closed his eyes. After half a minute, he opened his eyes and injected magic into the magic card. After that, there were strands of information coming back from the magic card's internal feedback. Picture, Fruit Eater Bug. Card name, Fruit Eater Bug. Type, Elf card level. Race Plant. Attribute, Grass/Dragon magic power, 500. Attack, 0 defense 1000. Ultimate skills, Gluttonous Ghost Fright, Retreat into Shell. A 1-star magic elf with a defense of 1000. Dake blinked and looked at the card to make sure that he did not miss a single 0. It was indeed 1 star, with 0 attack and 1000 defense. For a 1-star magic guide elf, its 3 inconceivably strong attributes were indeed enough to shock anyone. As for its race, this magic elf with dragon attributes was classified as a plant. This meant that it was a part of a plant, much more than a part of a dragon. Maybe after evolution, it can change its race. Dake thought for a while and looked at its ultimate skill. The first ultimate skill was Gluttonous Ghost. It was undoubtedly the embodiment of greed. However, according to Dake's memory, Gluttonous Ghost was not a trait that had many uses. Generally speaking, it was a special characteristic that would cause a Pokemon to automatically consume the tree fruit when its HP dropped to a certain level. Obviously, this could not be used in reality. Therefore, under such circumstances, Gluttonous Ghost's effect would most likely change. Dake was a little curious and injected more magic to check it out. Gluttonous Ghost. When the magic elf's magic power is less than half, it can continuously eat to replenish its magic power. 3-in-1/6100 plus 139/233. It's the end of the month. If I don't vote, it'll be a waste. My heart hurts. Epsilon equals 3. Chapter 522. A sure-kill skill that doesn't have much use in a magic duel. But it's a must-have for the Gluttonous Ghost. Dake's forehead seemed to be pulled down by 3 black lines. If the magic fairy could replenish its magic through food, then as long as it ate non-stop, every magic fairy could go on a trip as they wished. This meant that this fruit-gnawing bug had the potential to leave as it wished. Of course, that was if its crawling speed that was slower than a caterpillar could support it to leave the house. But after joking, Dake's expression quickly became serious. Although the sure-kill skill, the Gluttonous Ghost, lacked practical use, its academic value was very high. Assuming that there was nothing wrong with the feedback from the card, it meant that the magic elf with the sure-kill skill, Gluttonous Ghost, could convert any food into magic power. And food was all-encompassing and could include almost all substances. This meant that the fruit-gnawing bug had the special ability to convert all substances into magic. Website. https://m. But can't you? VIP if this special ability could be developed and used. For example, the magic pens that mages usually used were mercury shafts. Sometimes they would change it to magic potions or blood and other substances to write. However, if the fruit-eating bug could convert the magic potions or blood used in the magic pen into pure magic power, and then use it to write, the significance of this could be said to be a revolution in magic technology. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. If the sure-kill skill, the Gluttonous Ghost, could be developed and simulated, it would mean that the method of obtaining magic would become extremely cheap. And once the method of obtaining magic became cheap, then there would be the possibility of it becoming widespread. Just like how thousands of households used electricity, When that time came, this world might become a world where everyone could use magic. For magic conductors, magic power was the electricity of magic conductors. Although this idea had the possibility of being realized, it was obviously too idealistic and was far from being considered at the moment. Even if countless fruit-gnawing bugs were created and connected together like an electric circuit, there was no guarantee that they would be able to provide a steady supply of magic that would not be lost. Therefore, Dake thought for a moment and continued to look at the next sure-kill skill. Fruit-eating bug had a total of 3 sure-kill skills. Other than gluttonous ghost, there were fright and shrink into shell. But these 2 sure-kill skills, Dake was very familiar with fright, because Little Dream Demon also knew this ultimate skill and often used it to scare people. Even if he didn't summon the fruit-eating bug to test it out, he could actually guess the effect of the fruit-eating bug's sure-kill skill. It was the same level of shock as when a caterpillar suddenly emerged from a red apple. As for the other sure-kill skill, shrink into the shell, it was better to call it shrink into an apple. However, among the 3 sure-kill skills of the fruit-eating bug, shrink into the shell was undoubtedly the most powerful. Its effect was basically the same as rounding, which meant that it increased basic defense by 50%. This meant that the fruit-eating bug could use this sure-kill skill to increase its defense, which was already much higher than 1 star, to a full 1,500 points. People who were used to seeing high-star magic guide fairies might think that 1,500 points of defense wasn't high, but in fact, it was already the peak value that a 3-star magic guide fairy could achieve. Its strength was unquestionable. In short, although this fruit-eating bug doesn't have any attack ability, its life-saving ability isn't weak. As a 1-star magic guide fairy, it also has a high defense comparable to a 3-star magic guide fairy. This characteristic can make it an indispensable character in the deck. In the sacrificial summoning system, a high-star magic guide fairy needed a low-star magic guide fairy as a sacrifice. In other words, only 2 3-star magic guide fairies couldn't summon a 5-star magic guide fairy. Therefore, if one wanted to increase the error rate, 1 2-star and 3-star magic guide fairies were essential. Of course, there were also people who would choose to only store 3-star, 6-star, and 9-star magic guide fairies in the deck to deal with the magic guide duel. That was indeed a good choice. However, it was only suitable for archmages who had a large number of powerful magic guide fairy cards. In fact, there were very few archmages who had that kind of surplus. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the fruit-eating bug. After grasping a little information about the fruit-eating bug, Dake chanted the usual summoning spell, and summoned it first. The fruit-eating bug's appearance looked like a red apple, but the apple revealed the eyes and tail of a green insect hidden inside. Its eyes looked like the apple's stem. The bottom half of the apple also had a yellow pattern like a mouth, and there were 2 small fong-like protrusions. Compared to a normal apple, it was a little bigger and weighed half a kilogram. Crunch! Dake held the fruit-eating bug with both hands and carefully observed it. The magic guide fairy that had just been born in this world tilted its head, and its eyes revealed a curious surprise. Then, like a chick that saw its mother, it used the cold apple to rub against his palm. It was hard to imagine that its original body was the green insect in the apple. Dake held it with his left hand and used his other hand to poke the apple's outer shell, and found that it had a reaction. If he gently rubbed the apple's outer shell, it would even squint its eyes in enjoyment. It was obvious that the apple had already become a part of its body. With the fruit-eating bug's current shape, it couldn't even pick up a pen, let alone take an exam after learning. Compared to the trash slime that could squeeze out tentacles from its body, its learning path might be more difficult. Well, there will be a way when the car reaches the mountain, and there will be a way when the boat reaches the bridge. There will be a way. Moreover, not all magic guide fairies are suitable for learning. Although Dake had the mentality of a parent and wanted all magic guide fairies to be able to grasp the basic knowledge, he wouldn't force it if he encountered one that couldn't learn. The fruit-eating bug had no limbs or telekinesis, and it couldn't even flip through a book. It was indeed too difficult for it to learn. Of course, he would think about it after further observation. Perhaps this greedy fruit-eating bug would be full of thirst for knowledge? Although the probability of it craving an apple was higher, Dake showed a sincere smile, and then rubbed the fruit-eating bug's skin for a while. The fruit-eating bug was really cute on the outside. As long as he forgot that it was a green insect, he wouldn't get tired of rubbing it. However, now wasn't the time to be lovey-dovey with it. Dake rubbed the fruit-eating bug's little tail, and took out the prepared Greed 3. He waved it in front of it and smiled. Do you know what this is? Crunch. The fruit-eating bug shook the apple that acted as its eyes and used its tail to push the apple in the direction of Greed 3. Its eyes revealed greed. Perhaps it didn't know what this magic guide card was used for, but it instinctively wanted to possess it. Dake put Greed 3 on its apple and slowly cast a normal summoning spell. Let me see what you will evolve into. The fruit-eating bug's body was quickly surrounded by the blue-purple light of greed. Dake looked at it expectantly. As the light released by Greed 3 was completely absorbed by the fruit-eating bug, the light of the greed emblem appeared in its apple. However, the greed emblem wasn't engraved on the apple. Obviously, it was engraved on its body. Then, the light of evolution burst out from its body, and its whole body was surrounded by the light again. The fruit-eating bug's life form underwent a drastic change. Dake saw very clearly that cracks appeared on the surface of the apple, just like an eggshell cracking. The bug turned into a dragon magic guide sprite opened the cracked apple shell. What appeared in Dake's palm was a green little lizard, whose body fused with the apple shell. Its front claws fused with part of the apple's skin to form the shape of a wing. Its eyes were yellow flakes, like the flesh of an apple, but with green eyelids that could open and close. The horns on the top of its head came out from the apple stem, and a piece of apple skin was attached to it like a hat. Its tail was connected to a larger piece of apple that looked like the bottom of an eggshell. It did look a little like a dragon. However, its body didn't change at all. It was still the size of an apple. When it curled up its body and pieced the broken apple skin back together, it could completely disguise itself as a whole apple. This skinny magic guide sprite was no doubt one of the evolved forms of the fruit-eating bug. Apple Wrapping Dragon. Apple Wrapping Dragon was the evolved form of the fruit-eating bug, after it used sour apple. Compared to the round honey dragon, its body was thin and long, and its cheek pouch contained a strong acidic liquid that could cause burns. It's actually Apple Wrapping Dragon? I thought that after using Greed 3's evolved form, it would be the fatter honey dragon. Dake couldn't help but rub his chin and think. It wasn't until the Apple Wrapping Dragon spread its wings and flew away from his palm that he came back to his senses and quickly hugged it again. Crunch, the Apple Wrapping Dragon let out an affectionate cry, then stuck out its thin and long tongue and licked his face. Dake happily knocked on its little head and looked at its attributes. Compared to the fruit-eating bug baby that was more cute than useful, the evolved Apple Wrapping Dragon should have better stats and ultimate skills. Card name, Apple Wrapping Dragon. Type, Sprite card. Level, *******. Race, Dragon attribute, Grass/Dragon magic power, 1600. Attack, 2000. Defense, 1000. Ultimate skills, Vitality, Gravitation, Dragon's Dive substitute. There was no doubt that this was a gold card. The evolution from the fruit-eating bug to the Apple Wrapping Dragon caused this orange card to transform into an evolution. Moreover, its stats and sure kill skills had all undergone a huge change. Dake picked up the Apple Wrapping Dragon magic guide card and looked at it carefully. The Apple Wrapping Dragon's star level was only 4 stars, which was the same as Ivan and the Little Devil's star level after their evolution. However, its race had changed from a plant species to a dragon species after its evolution. Although this kind of racial change was not unprecedented, it was still extremely rare. This meant that after the fruit-eating bug evolved into the Apple Wrapping Dragon, the plant part was very small. Although its size was small, it was indeed a genuine dragon species. Its attributes did not change, and it had both the grass and dragon attributes. In other words, it needed to withstand the double suppression of the ice element. The ice element suppressed both the grass element and the dragon element. The Apple Wrapping Dragon was very weak in front of the ice element magic guide fairy. After its 3 stats evolved, it finally had a huge increase. First of all, its magic power had increased from 500 to 1600. This was still barely enough for a 4-star magic guide fairy. However, its attack power had jumped from 0 to 2000 in an instant. This huge leap in strength meant that this was definitely an offensive-type magic guide fairy. This could be seen from the fact that its defense was still at 1000 points when it was the fruit-eating bug. However, the true characteristics of magic guide fairies were usually hidden in their killing moves. Therefore, Dake immediately looked at its killing move. He first noticed that the apple-wrapping dragon no longer had the killing move of the gluttonous ghost, and then he focused on looking at the killing move. The first killing move was Vitality. This was undoubtedly a killing move worthy of its name. Vitality, a magic guide fairy with vitality characteristics. When excited, its attack power will increase by 1.5 times, but the hit rate of physical attacks will decrease. Decrease the hit rate and increase the attack power. This is obviously a very violent passive skill. Dake frowned slightly and read carefully. Then he tasted the taste of greed from the excitement. It's very likely that after this killing move is used on the apple-wrapping dragon, it will only be triggered when it's greedy. The greedy magic guide fairy stimulated its potential in order to obtain more, causing its attack power to increase explosively. Then it's a good match. Dake couldn't help but think. Vitality was originally a hidden characteristic of the apple-wrapping dragon. Now that it had appeared as a passive skill, it had become a very bug-like killing move. The apple-wrapping dragon's attack power was as high as 2000 points. Once it was increased by 1.5 times, it would be 3000 points. 3000 points of attack was already the highest number that a 6-star magic guide fairy could reach. However, this 4-star apple-wrapping dragon could permanently increase its attack power by 3000 points when it was greedy. Compared to the 4-star Diru Beast, this was equivalent to the effect of the Divine Holy Ring, but the focus of the two was different. When Dake saw this, he couldn't help but feel happy. It was hard to imagine that the apple-wrapping dragon, which was only 30 centimeters tall, could have such powerful attack power. If it was allowed to fly faster, it would probably be as terrifying as a missile. In its killing move column, there was also a Dragon's Dive. Dragon's Dive. The apple-wrapping dragon releases a terrifying murderous aura, threatening and attacking the opponent. Sometimes it will make the opponent cower. If the target is in the shrunk state, the power will be doubled. Dragon's Dive was a dragon-type killing move that had decent power. When any dragon type used this killing move, it would allow the natural dragon's aura to be strengthened for a short period of time, crushing the opponent on the spiritual level, causing the opponent to cower in fear. As for the additional effect of the shrunk state, although it was less applicable, it wasn't useless. Therefore, this killing move was very qualified and even excellent as a means to use it with 3000 points of attack power. After Dake confirmed the effect of Dragon's Dive, he looked at the second killing move. Universal Gravity. This killing move that sounded extremely cool from the name was the unique killing move of the apple-wrapping dragon. However, there was a huge difference between its name and its actual effect. This was because it wasn't a killing move that controlled gravity as most people thought. Instead, it was a killing move that summoned an apple. There was no doubt that it was named after Newton's understanding of gravitation. Universal gravity. The apple-wrapping dragon can summon an apple and make it fall rapidly from a high place. If it hits the target's defense will be reduced by 50%. Although universal gravity wasn't as powerful as Dragon's Dive, it was still quite good. Moreover, it had the additional effect of reducing defense. What was even more terrifying was that it could reduce defense by 50%. This meant that if a defense of 4000 points could be reduced to 2000 points, it could basically destroy the defense of most meat shields. With defense reduction and the 3000 points of Dragon's Dive, once the apple-wrapping dragon found an opportunity, it would be a massacre. It could be seen that although the apple-wrapping dragon was small, it could nail its target to death like a nail. However, from Dake's perspective, he still had some unrealistic fantasies. For example, could the apple-wrapping dragon learn how to control gravity? Perhaps there would be a slight chance of improving its knowledge. One had to know that for magic related to gravity, even if it was just a slight change in gravity, It would take a magician half a lifetime to learn and accumulate enough experience to qualify for entry. However, the apple wrapping dragon was born with the ability to understand gravity. It could be said that its talent tree was full. I wonder if the apple summoned by the apple wrapping dragon can be eaten? Dake looked at the apple wrapping dragon, flapping its wings, and couldn't ask this question. Next, he looked at the last sure kill skill. Substitute. Substitute was a sure kill skill. It was named because it could create a substitute that was exactly the same as oneself. It had a pivotal position in the Pokemon system. Substitute. Separate a quarter of one's maximum life force magic to create a substitute with a quarter of one's life force. It can be used to block the damage and effects of sure kill skills. If one's life force does not exceed a quarter of one's maximum life force, it cannot be used. The so-called substitute was like a wooden stake in ninjutsu. It could create a substitute to replace oneself when receiving an attack, and then let the substitute take all the damage while one could safely retreat. If one was proficient in it to the extreme, they could even split their attention to control the substitute, making it move and even attack like a clone. Although the substitute definitely couldn't be as strong as the main body and definitely couldn't use sure kill skills, if it could inherit the main body's attack and defense, in actual combat, it could be used as an attack support. Among the 4 sure kill skills of the apple wrapping dragon, the substitute wasn't any worse than vitality. As for how widely the substitute can be used, I still need to test its attack and defense abilities, as well as its duration. After carefully thinking about it, Dake began to test out the effects of the 4 sure kill skills. He started with vitality. Wanting to arouse the apple wrapping dragon's greed was so simple that it didn't even need to be done deliberately to achieve it. Seeing the attack value on the magic card change from 2,000 to 3,000, Dake couldn't help but inhale slightly. He then ordered the apple wrapping dragon to use its sure kill skill, universal gravity, and summon an apple. When the apple fell from the sky, Dake immediately realized that it was indeed relying on the acceleration of gravity to gain its speed. This meant that it wouldn't be difficult to dodge it. No one would stand in one place and wait for an apple to fall. The damage that the apple could cause was obviously related to the height at which it fell. If it was directly summoned from the top of the head, it could easily hit, but it would be difficult to deal damage. However, if it was just to use the apple to hit the head and reduce defense, it would be fine as long as it could guarantee a hit rate. After the apple fell to the ground, Dake bent down to pick it up. Judging from the fact that it was still intact even after falling to the ground, this apple was definitely inedible. Its appearance was no different from the fruit-eating bug, and it was clearly a magic creation. In less than half a minute, Dake saw the apple turn into magic and quickly dissipate. If substitute also has such a duration, it won't be easy to deal with it. Dake frowned slightly and ordered the apple wrapping dragon to use its sure kill skill, substitute. Then, the apple wrapping dragon's body immediately emitted a faint white light, and its magic instantly decreased by 400 points. Then its body swayed and disappeared from its original position, appearing a short distance away. On the ground where it originally stood, there was a wood-like substitute. From the outside, this substitute looked exactly the same as the original. The only difference was that its eyes were dull, and its movements were stiff. It didn't have any spirituality, and it was even stiffer than a magic fairy with an intelligence level of 2.0. This meant that if Dake wanted to use it as a substitute, he had to control it himself. Dake told it his intentions. Then the apple wrapping dragon carefully thought about it and stared at the substitute. Then the substitute flapped its wings and gradually flew up. This meant that controlling the substitute to attack was also possible. It was just that it would be extremely difficult to control it in battle. Wait. Dake looked at the substitute and suddenly had an idea. Although substitute consumed a quarter of its maximum life force, which was magic power for magic fairies, this quarter should be the lower limit. What if it separated more life force? Apart from not being able to use sure kill skills, substitute's only weakness was its lack of life force. If enough life force was separated, could it pass off as genuine and deceive the opponent? In theory, it should be possible. Unfortunately, substitute's cooldown is extremely long, and it will take a full hour to use it again. As he thought about it, Dake suddenly noticed that substitute showed no signs of disappearing. Even when apple wrapping dragon degenerated into a fruit-gnawing bug, substitute still didn't disappear. Could it be? Dake ordered the fruit-gnawing bug to try to control the apple wrapping dragon as he calculated the time. After waiting for substitute's cooldown to end for an hour, substitute suddenly disappeared. Before it disappeared, its magic power was extremely condensed, and it would only consume magic power when it moved. If it didn't move, it wouldn't consume magic power. With this sure-kill skill, even the fruit-gnawing bug will be able to take the exam. Dake suddenly said excitedly, "Kali Kali." The fruit-gnawing bug, which didn't know what its master meant, let out a cheerful cry. In short, Dake was extremely satisfied with the ability that the fruit-gnawing bug obtained after evolving into apple wrapping dragon. After he tidied up the laboratory, he took the fruit-gnawing bug to the dining hall and introduced the new cutie to the magic elves during lunch. Then, he entrusted the cutie to the special child-rearing master, Polymorph. Perhaps because the fruit-gnawing bug was a grass-type creature, it was naturally close to the trash slime and soon played together. "This is the magic elf that you refined with the dragon worm fruit?" Ms. Plant asked in surprise during the meal. Because the fruit-gnawing bug's appearance was too special, she recognized it at first glance. Dake nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, it went very smoothly. It's the magic elf that I wanted to refine." "It's grass type." Ms. Plant sniffed and said, "It has the fresh and sweet smell of grass." Dake took the opportunity and said, "I want to assign the fruit-gnawing bug to your study group. Is that okay?" Ms. Plant was startled for a moment, then smiled and said, "Of course. It's just that I'm afraid it can't even flip through the teaching materials, and there's only 1 month left until the end of the month. And you're going out in the middle of the month." Dake smiled and said, "The fruit-gnawing bug's education is outside of the goal." "That's good." Ms. Plant nodded immediately and said, "I also want to see how the magic elf refined with the dragon worm fruit is similar to the dragon worm fruit." Dake smiled and didn't say anything. After lunch, he returned to the room with the magic elves. When he introduced the fruit-gnawing bug further, he prepared to use Greed 3 to evolve it into the apple wrapping dragon. At the same time, he also let the apple wrapping dragon try to separate more life force into the substitute. However, during this evolution, an unexpected situation occurred. The fruit-gnawing bug didn't evolve into the apple wrapping dragon, but into another form, the honey dragon. Looking at the honey dragon in front of him, Dake couldn't help but reveal an extremely surprised expression. The magic elves also noticed his expression. After being given the responsibility of parenting, the polymorph transformed into a little Dake and asked in a childish voice, "Is there a problem? Are you busy?" Dake looked at the concerned faces of the magic elves and told them that the fruit-gnawing bug could use 2 types of apples to evolve into 2 different forms. Squeak! Little Ibu let out a cry of surprise and looked at the honey dragon with a much more affectionate expression. The honey dragon that was surrounded by the magic elves was almost 40 centimeters tall, and from the extent of its plumpness, it was obviously much bigger than when it was the fruit-gnawing bug or the apple-wrapping dragon. Dake reached out and weighed it, and found that it had become extremely heavy, at least 10 times heavier than the fruit-gnawing bug. The honey dragon had a shape similar to that of a turtle. Its bulging back was covered with woven fruit pie lace, and the top of its back still retained the eyelids of the fruit-gnawing bug. But in fact, the part of its head that drooped down like the ears were its real eyes. Compared to the apple-wrapping dragon, that was sour and astringent, the honey dragon, that could only evolve after using the sweet apple, was wrapped in sweet honey, and it emitted a kind of mouth-watering sweet smell. Especially its back. It was like a fruit pie that was smeared with honey. If Dake's memory was not wrong, it seemed that it was indeed edible. Once he thought of this, Dake's finger was moved. But after considering the impact, he immediately gave up the tempting idea of tasting it. In short, after accepting the fact that the fruit-gnawing bug had inexplicably evolved into the honey dragon, Dake began to actively search for the reason that caused this situation. He then injected his magic power into the magic card that had undergone changes, and began to analyze it in depth. Card name, Honey Dragon. Type, Elf card. Level, ********. Race, Dragon. Attribute, Grass/Dragon. Magic power, 1600. Attack, 1400. Defense, 1600. Ultimate skills, Apple Sour Growth Iron Wall, Spinning Top Ball. Compared to the Apple Wrapping Dragon, that emphasized attack, the Honey Dragon's three attributes were obviously more balanced. However, Dake actually preferred the Apple Wrapping Dragon's attribute distribution method. Being too balanced meant that there was no special characteristic. He originally thought that the Honey Dragon would be a magic elf with full defense, but it was not. Moreover, its magic power and attack were not up or down, which was a little awkward. If there was anything that was worth consoling, it would be that it was also a gold card that had 4 ultimate skills. Among the 4 ultimate skills of the Honey Dragon, the first one was similar to the Apple Wrapping Dragon's universal gravity. It was an exclusive ultimate skill that only the Honey Dragon could learn in Pokemon. Apple Sour. Apple Sour. Attack with an acidic liquid extracted from a sour apple. While dealing damage to the target's defense will be reduced by 50%. Both of them lowered defense, but Apple Sour was more practical than universal gravity. It was basically like a jet of water that was shot out from the Honey Dragon's mouth. In terms of hit rate, it was higher than universal gravity. Moreover, according to the acid reserves in its body, it could shoot continuously or multiple times. Compared to the 50% defense reduction, Apple Sour's power was barely enough. It could only be said to be the icing on the cake. As for his second sure-kill skill, it was growth. Growth. Allow the body to grow in an instant, thereby obtaining a stronger physique. Attack and defense will be increased by 50%. Honey Dragon grow. Dake suddenly commanded. The Honey Dragon turned its head and let out a puzzled cry. However, it very obediently used the ultimate skill that was engraved in its instincts. Growth. Then its body, which was larger than the fruit-gnawing worm and the apple wrapping dragon, but was still only 40 centimeters tall, suddenly expanded. When it stopped growth, it had become a 2-meter-tall rideable dragon. Dake could not help but open his mouth. This growth, ultimate skill, regardless of whether it was the effect or the way it was presented, shocked him greatly. The 2-meter-tall Honey Dragon's visual deterrence was obviously not something that its original form could compare to. After increasing its attack and defense by 50%, the Honey Dragon's attack had reached 2,100 points, and its defense had reached 2,400 points. Moreover, these high values obtained through growth were the same as the Holy Ring, which was a basic attribute. This meant that after it used its third ultimate skill, Iron Wall, it would obtain an extremely terrifying increase in defense. Iron Wall. Make the skin as hard as iron, greatly increasing its own defense. The increase is 100% of the base defense. Compared to round shape and shrink into shell, the increase in defense was even more terrifying. Under Grow, the meaty dragon's defense could reach up to 4,800 points, even surpassing the fat penguin that Angus Jeffrey was so proud of. However, this kind of super increase came at the price of a decrease in the duration of the skill. After Dake ordered the Iron Wall, he realized that before Iron Wall disappeared, its body was rapidly shrinking, and it had already exited growth mode. The effect of Iron Wall did not last long either. The duration of these two ultimate skills were different. Growth could only last for 1 round, which was 30 seconds. On the other hand, Iron Wall could last for 2 rounds, which was 60 seconds. After the honey-rich dragon exited its growth state, just the effect of Iron Wall alone increased its defense to a high of 3,200 points. Although it's a little faster, it's still acceptable compared to the peak defense it can reach in a short period of time. Dake was in a good mood, so he looked at the last ultimate skill, Spinning Top. Spinning Top. Make the body spin at high speed and hit the opponent. The slower the speed, the more powerful the attack. The maximum damage is increased to 1.5 times the base damage. Spinning Top. S base damage was 100 points. As long as the magic guide fairy was slow enough, its damage could be increased to 150 points. The most famous ultimate skill with 150 points of damage was Death Ray of Destruction. This was a super ultimate skill that would stun the target for 1 round after it was released. Spinning Top, on the other hand, did not have this side effect. With the Spinning Top, S size and weight, its original speed was as slow as a turtle's crawl. If it used growth to increase its size, its speed would be even slower. This meant that most of the time, it could maximize the power of Spinning Top. Apple Wrapping Dragon and Honey Dragon. S attributes and ultimate skills each had their own merits. Compared to Apple Wrapping Dragon, which had Substitute as ultimate skill, Honey Dragon not only had a good attack power, but it also had a much better defense. The only problem was that its stamina was too short. Magic guide fairies that lacked stamina were not very suitable for actual combat. However, they could often shine in a magic guide duel that could decide the winner in a short period of time. However, Honey Dragon, which did not have Substitute as ultimate skill, could not allow the Fruit Eater to gain test ability after training. This was too regretful. In order to allow the Apple Wrapping Dragon to gain test ability at critical moments, it was very necessary to thoroughly study its evolution mechanism. What exactly was the reason for it to evolve into Apple Wrapping Dragon and Honey Dragon? Combining the different situations during the 2 evolutions, Dake fell into deep thought. Before the lunch break ended, he gradually had a clue. Compared to the situation when the Fruit Eater evolved into Apple Wrapping Dragon, there was obviously a very big difference when the Fruit Eater evolved into Honey Dragon. That was also something that was very easy to associate with Gluttony, the ultimate skill. When it evolved into Honey Dragon, it was in a satiated state. However, could it be that satiation was the only thing that determined its evolution form? It's not Gluttony, as Magic Guide Fairy. The probability of this is actually not high. But if it's negated, what could be the reason for the difference? Dake continued to think. Perhaps satiation isn't the final reason that determines its evolution form, but the reason that causes a certain state. Because it was satiated, the Fruit Eater obtained the corresponding state and evolved into Honey Dragon. Yes, that should be the case. Dake's eyes flashed as he realized that he was gradually getting closer to the truth. Then, what would it feel after it was satiated? The most common feeling, of course, would be satisfaction. The Fruit Eater is a magic guide fairy refined from the fruit of greed. Most of the time, it would be in a greedy state, which means it doesn't know how to be satisfied. But after it was satiated, at least for a short period of time, it would definitely obtain a certain degree of satisfaction. And it was that satisfaction that allowed it to evolve into Honey Dragon, under the effect of Greed 3. That should be the reason. Dake couldn't help but feel a little excited. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that his guess was correct. The newly refined Fruit Eater was in a very hungry state. Although it was difficult to show it because of its appearance, it was definitely full of greed for most things. Therefore, after using Greed 3, the Fruit Eater evolved into Apple Wrapping Dragon. And after eating its fill in the afternoon, the Fruit Eater was temporarily satisfied. Its greed was temporarily suppressed, and it evolved into Honey Dragon. If that was really the case, it meant that these 2 evolution forms were relatively controllable. In other words, the test ability was achieved. 5 and 1 10,000 plus, 142/233. Thank you baby for the silver treasure chest reward. Thank you baby for the 12 monthly votes. Thank you baby for the magnanimity. There are only 3 days left until the end of July. Brothers, if you don't vote now, it will be a waste. I'm worried sick. Chapter 523. After the initial speculation, the next step was to verify it. Dake was not cruel enough to let the newly born fruit-gnawing bug go into a stressful learning environment that afternoon. Even if he threw it into a classroom, it would not understand anything. Later in the night, Miss Cook would give it one-on-one tutoring to help it master some basic reading and writing skills. As for how to turn pages, hopefully, it would be able to use its tail well. After lunch, Dake used Greed 3 on the fruit-gnawing bug every hour to verify the reason for the evolution. Along the way, he fed the fruit-gnawing bug, massaged it, and told it stories. This satisfied the fruit-gnawing bug and made it evolve multiple times. At night, Dake finally confirmed that his speculation was correct. The evolution of the fruit-gnawing bug depended on its level of greed before it evolved. Once the fruit-gnawing bug grew and mastered the ability to control its emotions for a short period of time, it would be able to determine the final evolution form by itself. However, that would be a long time in the future. Remember the website, Vipcanshu. 6. After Dake gave the fruit-gnawing bug to his tutors, he continued to write Mathematics 2. After absorbing great sins, Kieran continued to draw Pride. On the 3rd and 4th of August, he drew Pride twice in 2 nights, obtaining a total of 3 points. His remaining index was 91 points, and his reserve for Pride was at 29 points. He was only 1 point away from 30 points. However, since he hadn't finished writing Mathematics 2, he wasn't in a hurry to draw the Pride on the night of August 5th. Instead, he decided to draw the Bliss instead. On the 5th and 6th of August, he drew twice. Bliss went from 93 points to 90 points, and his reserve reached 5 points. He could use it to cultivate the fruit of bliss. However, Dake still did not make a move. On the evening of the 7th of August, he drew 5 points from Pride, which had slightly increased and brought Pride's reserve to 35 points. At this time, he was once again faced with the dilemma of not being able to do anything. However, before greed was triggered, he didn't want to trigger rage or gluttony. Therefore, he had to choose between Pride and bliss. After careful consideration, he temporarily chose Pride. On the one hand, leveling up Pride was relatively easy. On the other hand, he was also worried that his 35 points of Pride would not be enough. It was better to have more in reserve just in case. Therefore, after a series of operations, he continuously drew Pride 3 times in the remaining 3 nights, raising his reserve to 35 points. At this time, the writing of Mathematics 2 was coming to an end. August 10th, late at night. Dake didn't feel sleepy at all as he continued to write. Finally, at 3:30 a.m., he had filled in the last part of the book. In that instant, he felt as if his entire being had been sublimated. It was as if he could see an angel smiling when he closed his eyes. If she recalled carefully, he didn't seem to have been this serious during the college entrance examination. However, this had something to do with the fact that mathematics was his strength. But on the whole, it had the most to do with one's mentality. During the college entrance examination, he was forced to work hard. But now he was actively working hard. This caused concentration and mobility to be in 2 completely different states. I'll save it for when I'm free. Dake relaxed as he put down his pen. After a simple wash, he crawled into bed. When Dake woke up again, it was already 10 a.m. On August 11th. Olga noticed that he had woken up, so she pushed the dining cart in. Dake finished his breakfast in the bedroom and pushed the door open. He needed to confirm the name of the Mage Guild and the 2 magic guide fairies today and tomorrow. Then he would register with Claire on Monday. Where's Auntie Claire? Admiring the flowers in the garden. Olga's quick reply made Dark stun for a moment. He subconsciously said, Aunt Claire, why are you so free? However, halfway through his sentence, he realized something and couldn't help but shut his mouth. Claire Kate was originally just an ordinary girl who liked reading books and small animals. She came from the clubhouse of fools. She wasn't as special as Scarlet Blood Concubine, nor was she as popular as Arvette. It was the Magical Animal Society that allowed her to enter the circle of the Golden Generation. It was the war that allowed her to gain experience that she didn't want. War Hero, Sage of Beasts. There were many other titles that she didn't want. Her dream was to read on the balcony and live an ordinary and stable life with her family and friends. But being born in that era, everyone had no choice. After returning to the Duke's mansion for half a year, Claire seemed to have regained some of the feelings of her school days. She set up a deck chair in the flower-filled garden under the tree of diesel that had already grown. It was rare for her to enjoy the peace of reading a book. "It's already so big?" Dake's voice sounded behind her. Claire didn't turn around. Instead, she smiled and said, "It's growing fast, isn't it? Looks like Olga took good care of it." In just 2 months, the tree of diesel in front of her had grown to the size of an adult banyan tree. The branches and leaves that extended outwards like clouds formed a perfect sunshade. Sitting under the tree of diesel, one's chaotic emotions would naturally be absorbed, and one would become tranquil. Its leaves had the ability of thought imprint, while its branches could be used to create high-level thinking bottles. It was full of treasures. Looks like it's time to reap the rewards. Dake sized up the tree of diesel in front of him, and began to choose the thick branches to create thinking bottles. Now, he didn't have enough thinking bottles, and even the wormwood tree was filled to the brim every day. If he could obtain a large number of high-level thinking bottles that had a shelf life of 3 months and a capacity of 30 drops, he wouldn't have to worry about the storage of great sins for a long time. Claire saw through his thoughts and said, "I'll let the people in the mansion try to create high-level thinking bottles, but the process is very complicated. I'm afraid you can only make one before you go to school. But after mastering the specific method, you should be able to speed it up. If you can arrange for either Eve or Aaron to enter Traveler's Street, I can send you a few more." "One is enough for now." Dake nodded. Then he looked at the leaves of the tree of diesel and suddenly said, "If these leaves are cut into the style of a notebook and the surface color is white, it should be very popular, right?" Claire looked up and said, "Using the leaves of the tree of diesel to make notebooks? That's a good idea. The leaves of the tree of diesel are indeed natural imprints. They can imprint the scenes in one's mind onto the leaves, and can be used repeatedly. If it's sold in the academy, there's no need to worry about the user's mental strength not being enough." Dake smiled and said, "With this, we won't have to worry about copying books on the blackboard in class. If the price is right, it should be a popular product." Claire said, "If Eve and Aaron want to open a shop in Traveler's Street, they do need a qualified product as a foundation. I think it'll work." Dake replied, "First, we'll use the imprints to stabilize the business. Then, after the dual cards and dual discs are developed, we'll build the shop in the academy into a shop exclusively for the academy. I'm looking forward to the day when dual games replace magic chess." Claire asked curiously, "For a mage, can a simplified duel game replace the charm of a magic duel?" Dake shook his head and said, "Obviously not. But the magic duel isn't our product. Students can't randomly find people to duel in the academy. Our duel disc is mainly targeted at magic chess. And because of the source of the cards, it's a product for fans." "Claire, for fans?" Dake smiled and said, "I think everyone in the academy will want to summon the celestial white dragon with their own hands, right? Even if it's just a projection." The two chatted and laughed, and half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. Then Dake remembered the purpose of his visit. He said, "Speaking of which, have you decided on a name for the club?" "International Projection Club." "Forget it. I also feel that this name isn't very down to earth." International Projection Club was actually derived from the International Illusion Club. It was the company name of the inventor of the Duel Monster card game in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Bekas J. Crofter. However, the current world didn't actually have the concept of a company. The existing chambers of commerce and associations were only the embryonic form of a company. The various models and rules were still imperfect. The word international was also a rare word. Naming it International Projection Club wasn't even as good as National Projection Club. If they went one step further, they might just name it National Duel Club. It would be more intuitive. And if they didn't use duel as the theme, there was no need to name it. Claire obviously had the same idea. She said, "I've thought of a lot of names these days, and I've also asked Yvette for her opinion. The name she's more inclined to is Dake Cat Club. What do you think?" Ooft. Dake almost couldn't breathe. Dake Cat Club wasn't as good as Dake No Need Club. Claire chuckled and said, "Okay, I'm just kidding. What I mean is that we can think of 2 names. One will be a branch club specializing in duel games, and the other will be the main club behind the scenes. Isn't this a collectivization? Dake couldn't help but be surprised. This is a very good idea. In that case, the branch club specializing in duel games can be named National Duel Club. It's simple, straightforward, and down to earth. National Duel Club. Claire thought carefully for a long time and felt that it was feasible. After the two reached an agreement, they continued to think of the name of the group. When Claire heard the concept of group from Dake, she said directly, "Then let's call it Dake Cat Group." Dake's forehead darkened. He said, "Let's just call it the Cat Club." Claire. Cat Club, not bad. Dake. In short, the name of the main club didn't need to be so rushed. As the two talked, they talked about the names of the two magic elves. Claire interrupted Dake's previous idea and directly made a decision. "I think the name Phoenix is feasible. Phoenix is a good name. But the name of the vampire's daughter needs to be changed. It's not good to use Ophelia's previous name." Dake nodded slightly. This was one of his goals. When he thought of naming the vampire's daughter Olivia, it was just a spur of the moment. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not feasible. Therefore, he also thought of a new name in the midst of his busy work. Then how about Victoria Dimming? Claire thought for a moment and asked, "Does this name have any meaning?" Dake smiled slightly and said, "It's the goddess of victory, the symbol of prosperity, and the inspiration of a brilliant era." Victoria was a word that was remembered by the era. However, it was not in this world. In that world, the reign of Queen Victoria of the Great Eagle Empire was called the Victorian era. The waves of scientific inventions in that era were surging. People believed in scientific progress, and were full of optimism and confidence in the Industrial Revolution. Even the art world was filled with dazzling stars. Countless great writers, poets, and their works had emerged. The unique Victorian style had even continued to this day. The moral concept of the Victorian era included a high degree of moral integrity and a detailed code of language and behavior. When all these factors were combined, they formed a prosperous and peaceful era. Yes, just like this era in this world. Dake named the vampire's daughter Victoria. It was his hope for the future of the vampire's daughter, and also for the beautiful expectations of this era. Claire didn't recognize anything wrong with the name, so she readily agreed. After the two sides reached a consensus on this point, they began to discuss the identity registration of the two magic elves. As for the registration of the National Duel Club, Claire had already taken care of it. She had been hesitant, and had not completed the name registration. "If that's the decision, we'll go register in the afternoon." Claire smiled and closed the book. She then returned to the mansion with Dake. Then it was quickly after lunch. Dake called maid teacher Vignan and ordered her to take care of the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's appearance. The identity registration required a photo. As girls, of course, they had to show their best side. The vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter had already prepared beforehand. Dake had also communicated with them when he was naming them. But now that things had come to a head, the two were still a little nervous. Or the proof of identity meant that they were no longer pure magic elves. This kind of change in identity brought about daily changes that would be reflected in all aspects. The most important change was the upcoming entrance test. Once they successfully passed the entrance test, they would enter the Shungmalian Academy as individuals and become first-year students. When the time came for them to be assigned dorms, it meant that they would have to live separately from Dake. This did not affect the Phoenix's daughter, who was not Dake's magic elf. But the vampire's daughter had never left Dake's side since she was born. Sometimes when she thought about it in the dead of night, she would be a little scared. What's more, according to the rules of the Shungmalian Academy, the probability of them being assigned to the aristocratic academy was almost zero. Although not everyone in the aristocratic academy was a pure-blooded aristocrat, the two magic elves without any trace of human blood could not meet the requirements to enter the aristocratic academy. This meant that not only would they have to be separated from Dake in two different dorms, but they would also have to be separated into two different academies. Because of this, the vampire's daughter even had some instinctive rejection of the matter of entering the aristocratic academy. But considering that the Phoenix's daughter also wanted to enter the aristocratic academy, She also wanted to respond to her master's expectations. That little rejection could only be hidden in her heart. Moreover, she actually had some small expectations of living alone. A person's state of mind was always in conflict. From this point, the vampire's daughter was clearly no different from a real human. The two magic elves were naturally beautiful, and after a little bit of decoration by teacher Vignan, they were even more exquisite and charming. The vampire's daughter looked young, but considering the Shung Malian Academy's age limit, Dake was still prepared to register her as 11 years old. As for the Phoenix, who looked older, it was estimated that she would register at 12 years old. After the two magic elves were dressed up, they had the same hairstyle and changed into similar clothes. One's hair color was pink like cherry blossoms, while the other's hair color was crimson like flames. But overall, they belonged to the same color system. When the two of them stood together, they looked like a pair of sisters. "Are you ready?" Dake looked up and down and asked. "Let's go, let's go." The vampire's daughter pouted and said. The Phoenix's daughter only slightly nodded. Yvette was not in the Duke's mansion, so she naturally could not accompany them today. This made her feel a little disappointed. Dake saw that she was in low spirits, so he said to her, "Phoenix, do you like this name?" The Phoenix's face was cold as usual, and she slightly nodded. Dake smiled and said, "It's good that you like it. This is the name that Mother and I came up with together." The Phoenix's expression was moved, and her face instantly relaxed. Dake turned around and glanced at the vampire's daughter. He said, "The city hall is quite far from the mansion. We need to hurry." The vampire's daughter immediately understood. She reached out and grabbed the Phoenix's arm, then bounced and followed his footsteps. Claire watched the whole process and only smiled. The dragon tamer guards were already waiting outside the Duke's mansion in a dragon horn carriage. The group of people left the mansion and directly boarded the carriage. Including Olga, a total of 5 people squeezed into the carriage, but it still did not seem crowded. The vampire's daughter had just sat down, and she chattered about the registration process. Dake said that he did not know, and the vampire's daughter pestered Claire. Claire could only put down the book that she had just picked up and patiently explained. The city hall did not have a 2-day break, or it could be said that the 2-day break was the busiest time for such official business. Those public officials generally used a shift system. Originally, people like the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix's daughter were completely unregistered and did not have the qualifications to register at all. However, they were going to register with the surname Dimung, which made everything different. After a 2-hour ride, the dragon horn carriage stopped in the open space outside the city hall, and the group of 5 people got off one after another. Dake raised his head and glanced at the majestic city hall, then took the lead and walked into the hall. The public officials in the city hall seemed to have already heard of some rumors. The staff in charge of receiving VIPs saw his face and quivered, then hurriedly went up to greet him. Everything went smoothly after that. No one would provoke a duke's son for no reason. Not to mention that the Duke was Yvette Saint Dimung. Under these circumstances, the registration process, which originally took about a week to complete, was completed in only half an hour. After another half an hour, the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix's daughter successfully received their ID cards. Although the surname of the 2 magic elves was Dimung, in terms of kinship, they were the daughters of a family member who had already passed away. On the surface, they were fostered in the Duke's mansion and were Dake's cousins. For the time being, there was no clear distinction between cousins and cousins in this world. Whether it was uncle's daughter or uncle's daughter, they all used the same term. In addition, at the same time that they received their ID cards, the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix's daughter also had their birthdays. The vampire's daughter was born on the night of April 1st to April 2nd. Since it was past midnight, it was registered as April 2nd. As for the Phoenix's birth time, since Yvette did not specifically remember the exact time, Dake simply set it as April 2nd as well. When the time came, the 2 sisters' birthdays would be celebrated together. Wouldn't that be perfect? In short, when they took their ID cards and left the city hall, their faces were filled with joy. Today was obviously an extraordinary day for them. Before the sky turned dark, the 5 people took the carriage back to the Duke's mansion. Then, the vampire's daughter immediately pulled the phoenix's daughter and ran into Dake's room in high spirits, sharing her joy with the other magic elves. Although the magic elves were inevitably a little jealous, they were also happy for them. However, when it came to birthdays, many of the magic elves' expressions changed slightly. Since Dake held a birthday party not long after returning home, the magic elves were very clear about the meaning of birthdays. Now that the vampire's daughter and phoenix's daughter had their own birthdays, what about them? After they gained sentience, most of them could remember their own birthdays. However, if every magic elf had to celebrate their birthdays, when Dake had more magic elves in the future, wouldn't he have to celebrate their birthdays 365 days a year? But while the magic elves were worried about this, Dake and Claire were also talking about the same topic. As the saying goes, one does not worry about scarcity, but about inequality. When the magic elves gained sentience, they could no longer be treated as magic elves. The moment the vampire's daughter and phoenix's daughter received their ID cards, Dake had a deeper understanding of this point. In the future, if he only celebrated their birthdays, it would definitely lead to family discord. So what are you going to do? Claire asked with a teasing tone. But Dake had been thinking about this problem on the way back to the mansion. He said with a straight face, "Then let's set a collective birthday." Claire asked curiously, "April 2nd? Dake shook his head and said, "June 6th. Claire gaped. "Your birthday?" "Yes." Dake nodded. "I thought about it, and this is the only day that won't cause any disputes. From next year onward, my birthday will be their birthday. If we celebrate together, no one will object, right?" Claire gaped and couldn't help but chuckle. "What a lousy idea." Dake asked, "Isn't it good?" Claire shrugged. "It's all right." The two of them entered the dining room, sat down at the table, and began to discuss their next itinerary. The Ultimate Duel Club would complete the final registration of names tomorrow. The ones in charge of this matter were Eve and Aaron, who had been poached from the Scorpio Palace maid group. This time, the two of them would be heading to the Shungmalian Academy to take part in the entrance test. "We definitely won't make it in time to take the magic car. So this time, we're going to ride the wyverns. This way, we can reach the Shungmalian Academy in just one day. A wyvern can only carry 2 people at most, so we need at least 4 wyverns. Are you going to ride the wyvern with me, or the dragon tamer guards?" Claire said while tapping the table with her knuckles. After Dake listened carefully, he said decisively, "Of course the dragon tamer guards. Of course you're going to ride with me, right?" Claire slammed the table. "My wyvern is stable and fast, which the dragon tamer guards can't compare to. I heard that the first time you rode a wyvern to the academy you fainted? Don't worry, with me around, nothing similar will happen again." Dake couldn't help but smile awkwardly. The matter of the dragon fainting at the beginning of the semester could no longer be hidden. In fact, his dragon fainting wasn't that serious. If he had stuck a Karsic sticker made of a spiral leaf on his temple before riding the wyvern, it would have been much easier. At that time, he was actually scared. However, Claire's hospitality was hard to refuse. In order to not let her continue to investigate and expose more facts, Dake had to reluctantly agree. "Since it only takes 1 day to arrive on the wyvern, should we leave on the 13th or 14th? He immediately asked. Claire rested her chin on her hand and thought. Under normal circumstances, it would be better to arrive a day earlier. The Shungmalian entrance test isn't easy, so it's best to collect some information in advance. Also, we need to know who our opponents are." "Dake, opponents?" "Uh-huh." Claire nodded and said, "The Academy can't issue invitations to everyone in the world who meets the entrance requirements, so they provide an additional entrance application channel. Every year at this time, thousands of soldiers and horses cross the single-plank bridge. Thousands of children of the right age will gather in the small town outside the Academy from all over the world. Some parents who lack means of communication will go to the small town a week, or even half a month in advance. During this time, they will submit an application to the person in charge of the Academy, which is actually the first round of screening." Dake pondered. "Will the Shungmalian Academy conduct a preliminary examination of their identity and background?" Claire said, Yes. Under normal circumstances, this round alone will eliminate 80% of the people. Dake couldn't help but frown. Why so many? Claire said calmly. Because some things are a threshold that can't be crossed, such as the talent for magic power. Those who don't have enough talent for magic power won't be able to pass the entrance test, even if they pass the first round of screening through other means. Dake frowned. Like Eve and Irene? Claire said. The two of them were eliminated, not because they didn't have enough talent for magic power, but because they didn't have enough talent for magic. Dake couldn't help but ask, what's the difference between talent for magic power and magic? Claire shrugged and said, I'm not too sure about that. However, the Shung Malian Academy has a complete set of measurement methods that can be used to grade the talent for magic. Of course, for magisters, as long as they can cross that threshold, their future achievements won't have a decisive relationship with their talent for magic. Dake agreed. Although the threshold for magic is lower than that for magicians, in the end, both paths lead to the same destination. They both need to grasp profound knowledge in order to continue to improve. Claire changed the topic again. In addition, the Shung Malian Academy's entrance test actually has a quota limit. Dake said, I know that. In each year, there are only about 40 students in each branch. This means that the number of students admitted each year is actually only 160. And among these 160 people, some of them have directly received an invitation to enter the academy, so they can enter without taking the test. Claire shook her head. It's not just that. The academy will, to a certain extent, estimate the number of students in each branch to ensure that the final number of students admitted will be evenly distributed. Also, what do you think of the House of Fools? Considering that Claire was born in the House of Fools, Dake repeated the academy's words. Although the students of the House of Fools don't have the courage of knights or the wisdom of magisters, they are innocent and pure, so they have the greatest possibility. Claire smiled helplessly at his cleverness and said, Actually, in the House of Fools, apart from the students who fit the characteristics of the fool, there are also a large number of students that the other branches can't accommodate. Dake frowned and said, But isn't the placement of students decided by the branch card during the ceremony? Claire smiled. The branch card is made by the academy. Dake couldn't help but be silent. However, as long as one could enter the Shung Malian Academy, no matter which branch they were assigned to, they would be able to enjoy the same educational resources. There was no essential difference between the House of Fools and the House of Nobles. After the two of them finished their discussion, the magic guide fairies were led into the dining hall by the supervising maids. The news that the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter had obtained their ID cards caused a stir among the magic elves for about a quarter of an hour. After that, most of the magic elves immediately dove into the tide of revision. Yes. The second stage of the test was tomorrow. Although tomorrow was the weekend, this matter was urgent. According to Dake's original plan, if he were to take the magic car to the Shung Malian Academy, he would leave tomorrow. At that time, he would temporarily leave the other magic elves in the Duke's mansion to take the test, except for the Phoenix. After all, the Phoenix wasn't his magic elf, so he couldn't summon her to his side. Therefore, he could only bring her with him. As for the other magic elves, they could stay in the mansion for 24 hours before the effects of Paradise and Zoo wore off. If he were to ride a dragon, this plan would only need to be changed slightly. As long as the tutors worked overtime after tomorrow's test, not only would the Phoenix be able to participate in the test, but he would also be able to see the results of the magic elves before he left the day after tomorrow. This would be very useful for Dake to further understand the learning situation of the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix. That night, Dake took out the textbook of Mathematics 2 and began to examine it. Even though Bliss and Pride had more than enough reserves, he didn't plan to conduct his experiments in the next 2 days. In addition, he hadn't thought of how to use the Fruit of Bliss, so he could use this time to think about it. The next day, August 12th, Sunday, Claire, Eve, and Aaron finally went to complete the final login of the Citizen Duel Club. From the moment the login was completed, the Dake's Cat Club proposed. Subclub was officially established. However, there was only one member of the Citizen Duel Club. Although Dake Dimon claimed to be the future president, he wasn't 16 yet and couldn't join the club. Eve and Aaron were only 14 years old and couldn't meet the conditions to join the club. But it was this incomplete society that was destined to bring a brand new atmosphere to this world. At the same time, the second stage of the Magic Elves test had also begun. Due to Camilla's participation, this stage of the test was much more convenient. The tutors began to grade the test papers after the end of each test. After working overtime, all the papers were marked by 8 o'clock that night. Dake checked the test scores of all the Magic Elves in the office. A total of 20 Magic Elves participated in the test, which meant that all the Magic Elves except for the newly joined Fruit-Gnawing Bug had participated. He roughly flipped through the test papers of all the Magic Elves and focused on the one that belonged to Snorlax. Reading and writing 36 points, arithmetic 48 points, common sense 34 points, history 33 points, a total of 151 points. Not bad, you've improved. Dake relied on his strong self-control and successfully resisted the urge to tear the test paper into pieces. Cyrus squinted at his expression and said amiably, "You've improved after all. You'll pass with less than half the marks. You have to know that Snorlax didn't know anything a month ago and scored 0 in all 4 of its subjects. Compared to back then, it has improved tremendously. I even think that we should reward it with a big meal. An appropriate reward can nurture its interest in learning." Dake's expression relaxed and he said, "That's true." Then he maintained a relatively calm state of mind and continued to look at the other test papers. The second stage of the test was obviously much more difficult than the first, but the Magic Elves test results were better as a whole. Among them, Fairy Ibu and Duru Beast tied for first place with 396 points. Lion Beast and Ibu-chan overtook Little Fiend Beast and tied for third place with 388 points. Below them were Little Fiend Beast, Shapeshifter, Kettle Kettle, Big Milk Can, Meow Meow, and Secretary Magus. In other words, the top 10 didn't change at all. It was still the same 10 Magic Elves. The last 10 places were led by the Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix Girl. It was obvious that under the pressure of the entrance test, these 2 humanoid Magic Elves were working hard and had made significant progress. The reason why they weren't able to enter the top 10 was because they had done too well. After that, Chio Sea Lion, Dream Demon, Moon Lady, Hawkman Wrestling, Trash Slime, Cyanide Dragon, and Sword Scabbard all obtained acceptable results. It could be seen that after the last stage of the test, they had learned to be brave. At present, apart from Snorlax and the fruit-eating bug, the other Magic Elves' grasp of basic knowledge could be said to be passable. After returning from the academy, the tutors would teach them some special knowledge in the remaining 10 days, such as magic, martial arts, and even the 4 arts. Dake didn't have any restrictions in this aspect. It all depended on the tutors and the preferences of the Magic Elves. In the end, Dake took out Miss Vampire and Lady Phoenix's test papers and placed them on the table. He asked, "Miss Cook, with the current level of Miss Vampire and Lady Phoenix, can they pass the general basic knowledge test?" Miss Cook showed a slightly confident smile and said, "The 2 of them have mastered the basic knowledge quite well. Although I'm not too sure about the standards of the Shungmalian Academy's entrance test, as a preschool test, it shouldn't be more difficult than this test paper in theory." That's good. Dake thought. I need an analysis of the correct answers, so that they can correct the mistakes on the test paper when they arrive. Miss Cook quickly took out a roll of notes from the drawer and said, "These are my personal notes." Dake took the notes and flipped through them. He couldn't help but nod. There was no doubt about the level of detail of these handwritten notes. He could take all the Magic Elves with him and let them correct the mistakes according to these notes. But if he did that, he would have to bring too many test papers. Instead, it would be better to distribute the test papers tonight and let the 3 tutors guide them on the spot. If there wasn't enough time, he could use this answer to fill in the gaps. Thus, he told them his idea, and the 3 tutors readily agreed. 5 and 1 10,000 plus, 145 of 233. Brothers, it's the last 2 days. If you don't vote for the monthly votes and the guaranteed blade, you'll be gone. Thank you for your monthly votes and blades. Asterisk, heart pseudo, star. Chapter 524. Even though the schedule was tight, there was still plenty of time to carry it out. Announcing the rankings, handing out the test papers, explaining the wrong questions. The total time taken didn't exceed 2 hours. Of course, this was the result of excluding little Snorlax's incorrect question. During this process, the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter were naturally the focus of attention. When Madam Cook was explaining the wrong questions, Sage Cyrus and Madam Plant were giving them one-on-one tutoring. Thus, the two magic guide fairies quickly solved the problems exposed during the exam. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the three tutors gave the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter their sincere blessings before saying good night to each other and leaving. After that, Dake gave out the little red flower rewards one by one. When he was about to go to sleep, Fairy Evie was still shamelessly sticking to his side, using a ribbon to tightly wrap around his arm. Seeing that Fairy Evie had once again gotten first place in the exam, Dake had no way of chasing it back to its small bed, so he could only hug this clingy little kitten and sleep together. Remember in 1 second. https://m, VIP can't you? VIP, August 13th Monday. The sky was slightly bright, and dewdrops were dripping down. Dake Dimming woke up in a hot and humid place. Fairy Evie seemed to have dreamed of something delicious, sticking out its little tongue from time to lick his face, so much so that half of his face was covered in saliva. Dake couldn't help but grab it by the back of its neck, and when it opened its hazy eyes, he threw it to one side and got off the bed from the other side. The time had come, and everything was ready. After washing up, Dake sorted out all the magic guide cards including Paradise and Zoo, and woke up all the magic guide fairies. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Most of the magic guide fairies had already developed the good habit of waking up on time. When Dake woke them up, all the magic guide fairies, except for little Snorlax, had successfully defeated the demon in the betting. Get ready to go. Dake's voice wasn't excited, but when the magic guide fairies woke up, their slightly confused expressions immediately changed. The Shungmalian Academy had always held a special place in their hearts as the birthplace of most of the magic elves. Although their life in the Duke's mansion made them rather happy, when it came to the day of their return, their hearts were filled with unconcealable excitement. As for Snorlax, Dake stored the catnip plant into the magic card after feeding it. The sudden change of the sleeping environment made Snorlax quiver all of a sudden. Then it immediately realized that the result of being put into the magic card was that it had lost the qualification for the last breakfast. It immediately called out anxiously from within the card. However, Dake had already stuffed it back into his card bag. By the time he arrived at the restaurant, it was already half an hour later. Although Dake had the intention to teach Snorlax a lesson, he felt a little embarrassed when he remembered that he had promised Professor Cyrus that he would give Snorlax a good meal. Therefore, he summoned Snorlax back to the cafeteria. Crack! Little Snorlax immediately grabbed the table knife and fork, revealing its ferocious face toward the food. At the main table, looking at Snorlax, Arvette couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Then she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry that I can't accompany you back to the academy." Dake said carelessly, "It's just a temporary trip back." Claire also said, "I'm here, aren't I? Don't worry about me." Arvette felt a little relieved and said, "I'll be there when you return to the academy at the end of August." Then she quickly ate her meal and left in a hurry. She's getting busier and busier. Dake couldn't help but shake his head. Claire raised her finger and said, "It can't be helped." After the Demon King's execution ceremony, many hidden forces revealed themselves. As the Minister of the Kingdom's Security Department, she has to lead the department to conduct a comprehensive investigation on those hidden forces and make a safety assessment. If the danger is too high, she has to lead a team to deal with it. Dake said, "Let's not think too much. When do we leave?" Claire looked up at the clock on the wall and said, "In another hour. As long as we can arrive at the academy town outside the Shungmalian Academy at night, it's not that urgent." But after only half an hour, they all appeared at the entrance of the Duke's mansion. Those who needed to ride the flying dragons were Dake, Eve, Irene, Phoenix, and Claire. The rest of the magic elves were all returned to their magic cards. Have a safe trip. Olga folded her hands in front of her stomach and bowed to send them off. Aurora, who was beside her, also said, "Have a safe trip." "We will." With the blessings of the two girls, Dake turned around and headed to the dragon taming platform. The dragon taming guards who were directly under the Duke's mansion were already waiting there. From the beginning, they were a troop that was established to tame the flying dragons. Even though most of the time they were used to drive the dragonhorn carriages, their willpower had never been worn down. Only the vast and boundless sky was their path. The dragon taming guards who stood upright beside the flying dragons were obviously different in spirit. Each of them was like a long sword that pierced through the clouds, emitting a sharp aura. But perhaps only such people could tame the flying dragons. Roar. An oppressive dragon roar suddenly rang out. The thin but real presence of the dragon's aura was instantly intimidating. Dake couldn't help but turn his head to look. The wyvern that was obviously larger than its companions was looking down at the newcomers from above. It wasn't until Claire entered its field of vision that the wyvern's eyes softened. "How is it? Is my flying dragon okay?" Claire's tone couldn't hide her pride. Although this wyvern was a spoil of war from the Demon King's army's leader during the war, after becoming her mount, it had been galloping on the battlefield without the slightest fear. It had accompanied her through the entire war. Dake came to the wyvern's side and quietly swallowed his saliva. Although they were all wyverns, the aura emitted by this wyvern made the other wyverns look like children's toys. If it wasn't for Claire, he definitely wouldn't ride this guy, because it was obviously a joke to his own life. Even so, he couldn't help but hide the flight incantation in his sleeve so that he could use it at any time. This wyvern emitted such a restless and manic aura, but when Claire caressed its body, its mood quickly calmed down, and the restless aura also became as calm as water. Dake couldn't help but sigh. Compared to those tame little lambs, it is indeed more attractive. Am I right? Claire smiled slightly. I'll bring you up. Then she suddenly hugged Dark from behind. With a tap of her toes, she leaped into the air and sat on the wyvern's back saddle without any extra movements. Dake's face suddenly turned red. He originally thought that the so-called shared ride should be sitting behind Claire, just like when the dragon tamer guard took him to fly. But until this moment, he realized that he had misunderstood Claire's meaning. Claire's slender and powerful arms passed under his armpits, grabbed the reins on the wyvern, and then gently pulled. The wyvern, which was originally repulsed by the addition of a stranger on its back, quickly let out a whimper. At the same time, Eve, Aaron, and Phoenix Lady were also brought onto the wyvern's back. Apart from Claire's wyvern, all the wyverns had passenger seats on their backs. Not only were there ankle buckles, but there was also a seat back, and every seat was secured by a safety belt. After Dake accepted the fact, he realized that Eve and Aaron were also visibly nervous. On the other hand, Phoenix Lady, who was riding a wyvern for the first time, didn't show any signs of fear. "Sit tight," Claire suddenly whispered in his ear. Dake's heart went numb. Then, he immediately felt a powerful ascending force. It felt as though an airplane had taken off, and he was instantly weightless. He had some experience. This time, he merely closed his eyes and his body didn't tremble. It wasn't until the wyvern flew high into the sky that the feeling of weightlessness gradually disappeared. Then 2 screams suddenly sounded in his ears. Eve and Aaron, who had always maintained their little adult appearances, finally revealed their 14-year-old girl's side. The twins, who rose into the sky, experienced double the joy through telepathy. Their faces were ghastly pale, and they trembled slightly in discomfort. Dake gaped and said in astonishment, "Don't tell me they have acrophobia?" "Acrophobia isn't a big deal," Claire whispered in his ear. "Facing the sky is the best treatment for acrophobia," she said and pulled the reins, causing the wyvern to flap its wings abruptly. As the wind element energy formed a barrier on the wyvern's back, the wyvern sped up and the scenery under its feet receded rapidly like the wind. This was the beginning of this journey in the sky. After all, Claire's riding skills weren't comparable to ordinary dragon tamers. Even among the Griffin Knights, it was hard to find an aerial knight who was on par with her. After the wyvern sped up, the entire flight process became unusually stable. Riding on the wyvern's back was much smoother than riding on a horse. The wind barrier parted the oncoming gales to both sides. There weren't any bumps at all. Dake had experienced the feeling of riding a wyvern for a long distance when school started, and it was completely different from today. Also, he didn't know if it was because of the flight spell, or because Claire was protecting him from behind, but he didn't have the slightest fear, and his mind was unprecedentedly clear. He began to enjoy the thrill of riding a wyvern like never before. When flying at high speed in the sky, there would be a severe deviation in the perception of time. The monotonous clouds would make people feel as if time hadn't moved at all. But when a conspicuous landmark appeared in their field of vision, they would suddenly realize that they had already flown such a long distance. The team of 4 wyverns stopped 3 times in a day. Apart from relieving the dragon tamer's exhaustion, they also needed to replenish the wyvern's food. Dake and the others took the opportunity to eat something. The places Claire chose to land were often places with pleasant scenery, which added a lot of elegance to this journey. After taking off for the 4th time, the wyverns passed through the golden sunset and arrived at dusk. Claire's wyvern was the first to land, and the other 3 wyverns followed closely behind. The 4 wyverns whizzed down from the sky, gradually slowing down, and finally landed precisely on the dragon tamer's platform in the academy town. The staff members of the academy squinted their eyes from the gusts of wind that had been stirred up. Only after all 4 dragons had landed did they familiarly walk up to the newcomers to register their identities. But when the staff saw Claire, he blurted out "Professor," and then everything was simple. Dake and the others even stayed in the temporary residence of the staff. "I originally planned to find a guest house to stay in." Claire touched her nose and embarrassedly rejected the staff's overly enthusiastic invitation to eat. She didn't expect that in less than half a year of teaching, she would receive such a warm treatment. At this time, it was almost impossible to find an empty hotel in the small town of the academy. Only those private residences might have rooms for rent. Every year's entrance exam was a rare harvest for the town's residents. But even so, Dake and the others only obtained the right to stay in 3 rooms. The 3 dragon tamers shared a room. Eve, Irene, and the Phoenix Lady shared a room. Dake shared a room with Claire. In addition, in order to let the vampire's daughter adapt to the exam atmosphere as soon as possible, he also summoned the vampire's daughter from the magic card. Then, Claire took out a pendant from her backpack and hung it on the vampire's delicate neck. "What is this?" the vampire's daughter curiously asked. Claire gently opened the lid of the pendant, revealing the red crystal attached to it. Then she smiled mysteriously. "Blood essence." "What is blood essence?" The vampire's daughter's eyes gradually brightened, obviously feeling the energy emitted from the pendant. Claire patiently said, "Blood essence, as the name suggests, is the essence of blood. In short, you can understand it as a clot of blood, or the aggregation of blood energy." "I see." The vampire's daughter closed her eyes and revealed a sweet smile. "I can feel my magical power recovering." Claire rubbed her head and said with a smile, "This blood essence is enough for you to use for at least 3 years. Do your best." The vampire's daughter nodded vigorously. "Okay." After they put down their luggage, they went to Eve and Irene's room. Eve and Irene, who had just alighted from the flying dragon, were obviously not in good condition. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. It's the last day, please vote. Chapter 525. Claire didn't expect that Dake wasn't the one who got dizzy, but Eve and Aaron instead. But with the twins' physical strength, they recovered after resting in the room for a period of time. After confirming their physical condition, Claire said with a smile, "Don't worry about us. Have a good rest. You'll need to be present to discuss the cooperation later." Eve and Aaron nodded silently and laid on the bed to recuperate. Then Claire turned around and left with the Phoenix Lady and the vampire. "I'll bring supper for you tonight." Dake grabbed their hands and left the room with Claire. At this moment, the 3 dragon tamer guards who had settled the luggage were waiting by the door. Since the maids didn't follow them, the 3 of them were ready-made guards. As for the 4 wyverns, They were taken care of by the academy's professionals. Let's go out and get something to eat. We can also see who has signed up this year, said Wang Yao. Claire gazed at the bustling crowd outside the window with glints flickering in her eyes. When she left the academy the day before Christmas, she didn't expect to return after just half a year. It was just that the world had changed, and when he came back, he had a different identity. She was no longer a Shengmalian student or professor, but a student's parent instead. Since Yvette wasn't accompanying them, she was the caretaker of the Phoenix Lady and the vampire. But at the same time, she was also a businesswoman looking for cooperation. Another purpose of her visit today was to discuss the cooperation with the Academy's person in charge. It could be expected that once this cooperation was negotiated, it would build a strong bond with the Shengmalian Academy regardless of whether it was profitable or not. Although this was not her original goal, once she had this plan, she had to take into consideration the impact it would cause. After careful analysis, she realized that the cooperation with the Shengmalian Academy was more important than earning monetary benefits. And in terms of negotiating this cooperation, she had a unique advantage. The Academy town was brightly lit at night. Children from all over the world walked on the streets accompanied by their parents. Most of them were pure-blooded humans, and human nobles dressed in luxurious clothes could be seen everywhere. However, it was inevitable that there would be some subhumans with strange characteristics. Most of these subhumans were mixed blood, but there were also a very small number of pure-blood subhumans. There were very few subhumans among the students, but that didn't mean they didn't exist. Even some royal members of the subhuman race would apply for the Shengmalian Academy, based on various considerations. However, compared to the hybrids who regarded the Shengmalian Academy as a sacred place, the pure-blood subhumans did not have that kind of extraordinary worship. Dake walked with Claire in the academy town, and saw some subhumans with extraordinary temperaments at first glance. When he was in the academy, he rarely paid attention to these things. Now that he thought about it carefully, there were indeed one or two races with obvious racial characteristics. But for him, who wanted to stuff his two magic elves into the Shengmalian Academy, it wasn't strange for subhumans to want to enter the academy. The group of people found a random shop to sit down and eat. After they sat down, the 3 dragon tamer guards spread out to gather information. The standard of living in the academy town wasn't high, and the quality of the food in the restaurants was maintained at ordinary standards. While Dake ate, he heard people complaining about the quality of the food. He smiled and lowered his head to eat. After they were full, the group strolled around the Zhanqian Street, in the academy town. The vampire and phoenix daughters had seen a lot in the king's city, but they were still lively and interested in everything they saw. Therefore, they strolled until 8:30 p.m. Then Dake bought some food and snacks and returned with the group. The 3 dragon tamer guards joined them on their way back. When they arrived at their residence, everyone was gathered. Then, the group knocked on the door of Eve and Aaron's room. "Come in." After this period of rest, the twins had apparently adjusted, and their voices were full of energy. Dake pushed the door open, placed the snacks on the table, and sat down. "Are you feeling better, big sisters?" he asked with concern. "Much better." Eve got off the bed and walked to the table. On the other hand, Aaron sniffed and asked curiously, "What did you bring back? It smells so good." Dake laughed and said, "Of course it's good stuff." As he spoke, he tore open the packaging of the food, and called for everyone to sit around. Then, Claire signaled for the dragon tamer guards to begin. The 3 dragon tamer guards reported the information they had gathered one by one. 15 minutes later, Dake had a preliminary understanding of this year's enrollment. According to the information collected by the dragon tamer guards, as of yesterday, the Shengmalian Academy had issued a total of 88 invitation letters. According to the past, the acceptance rate of the invitation letters was usually 100%. This meant that there were only 72 places left for this year's enrollment. However, the number of students who applied for admission to the academy town had exceeded 1,000. In other words, the passing rate of the admission test was only 7%. Picking 72 people out of 1,000 doesn't sound that straightforward. But what if you need more than 928 people? Dake tapped his fingers and said calmly, The vampire's daughter and the phoenix girl looked at each other, and the pressure that they were already under became even heavier. Is there anyone who scares people like you? Claire rolled her eyes at Dake and said to the two magic elves, with your abilities, as long as you pass the written exam, it's basically the same as knocking on the door of the academy. The tutors have already taught you what you need to learn. So you just need to perform normally for the written exam the day after tomorrow. Dake said, our Victoria is a 7-star magic elven, and Phoenix has an endless supply of magic. If you can't pass, who can? The vampire's daughter carefully raised her head and glanced at him, then suddenly said, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to. Phoenix girl stood up. But after standing up, she suddenly remembered that her room was here and sat down again. Dake looked at the two and suggested, it's almost time tonight. You two should rest early. There's still a whole day to study tomorrow. The vampire Missy and Phoenix girl's expressions froze, and then calmed down. Claire smiled and said, tell me about the special people who came to take the admission test this year. The dragon tamer immediately said, we've investigated. Most of the important people among the nobles have already received the admission invitation. There aren't many who are taking the admission test like the two ladies. And if we expand the scope to include the commoners, there are too many of them. We can't tell who's special for now. Claire considered and said, what about the subhumans? The dragon tamer said, the subhumans are more vigilant in this environment. We only heard that the royal orcs are taking the test this time. The royal orcs? Dake blinked and said, I hope they can pass the written exam. Due to the different cultures among the races, it was actually quite difficult for the orcs to pass the Shungmalian Academy's written exam. But in any case, since they were already here, there was no point in thinking about this. They still had to do their best. Dake and the others didn't stay in the twins and Phoenix girls' room for too long. After half an hour, they left one after another and returned to their rooms. Dake yawned after returning to his room. After washing up, he summoned the trash slime and applied it on his face under Claire's slightly surprised gaze. She couldn't help but ask, do you always use it like this? Dake didn't mind and said, of course. Aunt Claire, do you want to try it? Claire reached out and touched Dake's tender face, then shook her head and said, no. No matter how strong the trash slime was at cleaning the skin, it couldn't change the fact that it could secrete acid. If she wasn't careful, she could be disfigured. After all, it wasn't her own magic fairy. She didn't want to take the risk. But after seeing how Dake used the trash slime, Claire was already planning to make a similar magic fairy. When the two came out of the bathroom, the vampire's daughter was studying seriously in front of the desk. Dake said casually, although the magic fairy doesn't need to sleep, it's still important to maintain energy. It's more important to maintain enough energy before the exam than to read 2 pages of books at the last minute. The vampire's daughter didn't even raise her head and said, I know, I'll sleep early tomorrow night. Dake. I'm telling you to sleep tonight. Dake didn't know exactly how long the vampire's daughter stayed up. Anyway, when he was woken up by his biological clock at 5 in the morning, the vampire's daughter was snuggled up to him and sleeping soundly. He carefully got up but still woke Claire up. It's already morning? Claire opened her eyes in a daze and got up. The gradually brightening sky was blocked by thick curtains, and the room was still dark. Dake pulled open a corner of the curtains, as if bringing light into the room. Claire stood by the window with him for a while, then yawned and said, How is it? Is it stressful? Dake shrugged. It's a lot more stressful than when I took the exam myself. In the past 2 days, he had fully experienced how parents felt during the college entrance exam. Claire laughed. Relax. Even if you don't trust them, you should trust Ms. Cook and Mr. Cyrus. Dake. No, I trust them. Saying that, he walked away from the window, washed up and got dressed. Today, in addition to continuing to collect information on the exam and taking care of the 2 magic fairies, he had to have a preliminary meeting with the person in charge of the school. The staff who temporarily lived here had already informed the school of their arrival last night. He just didn't know who would come to negotiate on behalf of the school. Now that it was the exam period, Professor Shi might not have time, So the person who came to negotiate might be the person in charge of the model Easter egg business. Dake opened the door while thinking. He couldn't do morning exercises today, but he still prepared to go out for a walk. However, as soon as he opened the door, a griffin-like elf plunged into his arms. Dark took the opportunity to pick up the little elf and turned back with a strange look in his eyes. Claire, who was walking behind him, looked down at the fairy and understood. Principal Erdii, looks like you're back, Dake said. 8 o'clock in the morning. Dake, Claire, and the twins had already appeared in the principal's office inside the school. Cynthia St. Erdii personally poured tea and said kindly, I heard that Yalvita submitted 2 applications, so I came half a month in advance. Are they 2 magic fairies? Dake, yes, 2 humanoid magic fairies. Have you solved the problem of surviving outside? Erdii asked in concern. Dake nodded slightly. For now it's solved. Arte smiled and said, then I won't ask too much about the issue of intelligence. Do you need me to open a small door? Dake opened his mouth and couldn't help but say, how can you be so direct? If they really can't pass, then I can only say that they're not suitable for the school. Not completely. However, Principal Erdii shook his head. After all, that vampire's daughter was refined less than half a year ago. I also want to know how far a magic fairy can go on the path of magic. Special cases are special. Dake shrugged. Half a year is enough. Claire interjected. Let's talk about the cooperation first. Principal Erdii changed the topic and said, I've seen your letter. Do you want to reach an in-depth cooperation with the school regarding the expansion of the model Easter egg? Yes, Claire said. Like the model Easter egg, it's also an idea proposed by Dake. Once it's tested, the influence of Shungmalian Academy will spread to the whole nation. Principal Erdii couldn't help but frown. Tell me about it. Claire's lips curled up. She knew that she had piqued the principal's interest. She then explained the plan for the duel game in simple terms. The plan itself wasn't complicated. As long as they knew the idea, they could develop it on their own even if the school abandoned them. However, Claire knew very well that the Shungmalian Academy wouldn't do that. In terms of morality, there was no other partner that could compete with them. Sure enough, after Principal Erdii heard the idea, he didn't have the slightest intention of developing it on his own. He said directly, to simplify the high threshold of magic duels into a duel game that everyone can participate in through cards and dueling discs. This is a genius idea. Let me think about it. She picked up a pen and began to deduce on a piece of paper. Any kind of entertainment that could be used by the whole nation would have a meaning beyond the entertainment itself. Mastering this kind of entertainment was equivalent to mastering a tool to convey ideas to the whole nation. What's more, this was a bold attempt to popularize the magical engineering technology, following the tide of the times, unveiling the mysterious veil, and making magic and magic no longer feared was one of the original intentions of the school, to participate in the promotion of magic duels. Now there seemed to be a better way. 2 and 1 4,000 plus, requesting votes. Chapter 526. The conversation with Headmaster Erdii was very pleasant. Whether it was the idea of putting a projectable card in the model egg or the development of the dual disc, it wasn't difficult in Headmaster Erdii's eyes. Just as Dake had thought before, as long as he gave this task to Professor Kazair, he would be able to get the template in a day or two. The craftsmanship required to make the dual disc was far lower than the faculties or entrance cards. Maybe before leaving the academy, he would be able to get a prototype of the dual disc. At noon, Headmaster Erdii called Professor Kazair over. Then, everyone had lunch while discussing the details of the cooperation. Professor Kazair was very surprised by Dake's arrival and participated in the conversation with a smile on his face. Although Dake wanted to ask him in detail if he found Professor Didi after they separated that day, he could only suppress his fiery desire for gossip at this time. The two sides talked until the evening. Dake and Claire rejected Headmaster Erdii's invitation for dinner and quickly returned to their temporary residence in the academy town. Next, they could temporarily focus on the entrance exam of the Vampire's Daughter and Phoenix Girl. Remember the website, VIP, can't you? VIP. After the entrance exam, they would continue to discuss the details of the cooperation with the person in charge of the Academy's external transactions. Then, they would sign a temporary contract and this matter would be settled. Overall, this cooperation was a strong alliance. Although Claire and Dake were just an empty shell backed by the Duke's palace, no one would think that way. The Vampire's Daughter and Phoenix Girl gradually entered the state of mind during the day's study. The 3 Dragon Tamer guards also collected more information about the candidates. Dake flipped through the information about the candidates while casually answering the questions of the Vampire's Daughter and Phoenix Girl. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the 2 magic guide fairies were forced to sleep. The quality of sleep before the exam actually had a huge impact on the candidate's state of mind. Many candidates would lose sleep because of anxiety before the exam, and then their state of mind would be greatly reduced. They would be able to answer questions normally, but during the exam, their minds would be blank. Even though the Vampire's Daughter was usually mischievous and had more courage than anyone else, and the Phoenix Girl looked like an iceberg that could not be affected by anything, their hearts were like babies that needed to be carefully taken care of. Dake was very clear about their inner nature. Let's hope tomorrow goes smoothly. Claire raised the black tea like red wine and waved it at Dake. Dake agreed helplessly and said, "If we really can't pass, then we can only throw away our pride." Claire couldn't help but smile. So your toughness during the day was all fake? Dake smiled and said, "You have to at least pretend." The more he read the information, the more he felt that the chances of the Vampire Daughter and the Phoenix Girl passing the test were very slim. The examinees who had passed the first hurdle of the admission application were not here to try their luck. On average, they were 12 years old. Even if they started learning at the age of 6, they would have already studied for 6 years. On the other hand, the Vampire's Daughter had less than half a year to study, and the Phoenix Girl had even less time, only 2 months. Although the foundation of the magic elf's temperament was higher than that of children, it was still difficult to pull apart the gap. It was really difficult to make it to the top 72 out of 1,000 people. However, the test was tomorrow, and thinking about this now would not change the final result. Dake quickly put down his thoughts and went to sleep. The night was silent. Early the next morning, a loud bell chime could be heard from the plaza of the Academy town. Thousands of examinees, and even more people who accompanied them woke up one after another and quickly got ready. Dake helped the Vampire's Daughter change her clothes, then stuffed a toothbrush into her mouth and smeared her face with trash slime. Immediately after, Eve came in with breakfast sandwiches and milk. The Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix Girl ate breakfast in their respective rooms, then were sent to the teleportation square, dressed neatly. All these years, the admission test was conducted inside the academy. As long as one entered the castle, no one could cheat under the cover of the barrier. For most of the examinees, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As the 2 staff members waved their hands, a huge oval-shaped teleportation gate opened in the middle of the square. The examinees and parents who had little contact with magic could not help but open their eyes wide. Among the crowd, there were frequent discussions that could not be suppressed. The Shungmalian Academy's vice dean, Professor Shi Erfu, who was in charge of the daily enrollment, walked out of the teleportation gate and directly stepped into the air. She stretched out her green wings of the wind and attracted everyone's attention. She first expressed her welcome to the examinees, then briefly explained the details of the test, and finally said, "After entering the academy, the examinees will follow the staff members to the examination room in the castle. Parents will wait outside the castle for a while. We will bring you to the waiting room after the test begins." Then she raised her hand and made a "please enter" gesture, and suddenly disappeared in the air. The crowd exclaimed again, and the examinees yearned for the academy even more. Then, under the guidance of the staff members, the examinees, parents, and other people who accompanied them stepped into the teleportation gate one after another. Dake held the Vampire's Daughter's hand and led her forward. On the other side, Claire also held the Phoenix Girl's hand. The 2 magic elves were obviously nervous, and their fingers trembled slightly. Dake could not help but hold the vampire's daughter's hand tightly, then lowered his head and touched her head, and whispered, "Don't be nervous, just do your best." "Okay," the vampire's daughter responded, and suddenly turned around and hugged Dake, then turned around and continued to walk, but her white and tender cheeks were already flushed. However, her nervousness had obviously eased by a lot. But in fact, Dake Diming's heart was not at all relaxed compared to them. In the open space outside the castle, parents and children gradually separated, and the children lined up under the guidance of the staff members, and entered the castle in order. Then, at the entrance of the castle, the exam certificate in their hands would be replaced by a badge with a number engraved on it. The number on the badge was their examinee number. According to the number, the examinees would be assigned to different examination rooms. Dake glanced at the rapidly lengthening line, and hurriedly stuffed a cup of water into the vampire's daughter's hand, and said vigorously, "Good luck. Wait for my triumphant return." The vampire's daughter puffed up her chest, patted it hard, and pulled the phoenix girl to run to the line. Dake let out a sigh of relief, but his eyes were still staring at them. "Are you nervous?" Claire came over and breathed. Dake felt a tingling sensation, and could not help but say, "How can I not be nervous?" Claire smiled and said, "You're already so nervous now. When you have a child, won't you be so nervous that you can't sleep?" Dake quickly said, "My child has a 99.9% probability of receiving an invitation to the academy." Claire was stunned, and could not help but shake her head. "That's true." Then the two walked to the side, and after watching all the examinees enter the examination room, they followed the flow of people into the waiting room inside the castle. After the parents and other accompanying people were separated, they entered multiple waiting rooms. Dake and the others came to a lecture hall. But just as he was about to sit down, an old man who sat down in front of him said with concern, "Child, are you lost? This is the waiting room for parents." Dake was stunned, and then he said awkwardly, "No, I'm a parent." The old man could not help but look at him up and down with wide eyes, and then he said hesitantly, "Sir, you look really young." Pfft. Claire could not help but laugh. Dake said helplessly, "Sir, I'm here to send my sister to take the test." Oh, the old man finally understood and said, "I'm also here to send my sister to take the test." Dake, huh? This time, even Claire was so shocked that her jaw dropped. Even Aaron, who were behind her, could not help but stop in their tracks. The old man seemed to be quite proud of Dake and the others' surprise, as if he had won a round. Dark couldn't help but roll his eyes and say, "This senior is really old." The old man's expression froze, and then he laughed. "Let's get to know each other. I'm Oscar Aud, a former border count, and now I'm just a lazy old man." "Border count?" Dake's eyebrows twitched, and then he heard Claire's surprised voice. "Oscar Aud, could he be the lord of the Black Land bordering the demon race's territory?" After hearing this, the old man turned to look at Claire and sized her up. "Miss, have we met before?" "Mr. Aud, your pickup lines are a bit too old-fashioned." Claire smiled. "Although I've been there before, it was after the territory had turned into scorched earth." A trace of sadness flashed in the old man's eyes, but his expression was still kind. "Things change, there's nothing we can do about it. I only hope that the blood and tears we've shed can give the kingdom's citizens a longer period of stability. Miss and the young gentleman over here, won't you introduce yourselves?" Claire smiled and stretched out her hand. "Claire Kate, the Sage of Beasts." The old man was shocked, and then he said in surprise, "So it's the Golden Hero. Forgive this old man for not recognizing you. Over there, over here, could it be the hero's son, younger brother?" "You want to say son?" Claire pulled Dake over without any awkwardness and said proudly, "My best friend's son." Dake shook hands with Oscar Aud and said, "Dake Dimung, nice to meet you." The old man pondered for a while. The Golden Hero's best friend must also be a Golden Hero. The Golden Hero's son with the surname Dimung. Oh, could this be Yvette's son? "Does Mr. Aud know my mother?" Dake asked curiously. Oscar Aud said proudly, "Of course, don't look at me like this. I carried her when she was young. At that time, I never thought that my sweetheart, who even spoke softly, would become the Valkyrie now." As he spoke, he sighed again. Arvet, how are you now? Dake said seriously. As long as I'm all right, she's all right. Oscar Oud paused and said, That's true. Wait, didn't you send your sister here for the test? Your sister is. Dark smiled and said, She's not his biological child. Mr. Oud, where's your sister? At the mention of his sister, Oscar Oud's eyes showed a hint of affection. My sister, she. Boom. As they were talking, a loud sound came from somewhere in the castle. But when the people in the waiting room panicked, a voice came into the classroom and explained the reason. It's a magic explosion. Dake's pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but think of the second Princess Anna. The magic of humans would continue to grow as they grew older, until they reached the upper limit. And children who were born with extremely high magic talent would grow their magic very quickly. Once the amount of magic exceeded a certain limit before they grasped the ability to control magic, it could cause magic to go out of control and cause a magic explosion. This phenomenon was called the omen of the birth of demons in ancient times, and the children who caused it were labeled as children of demons and would be executed. When Dake was young, it was because of the second Princess Anna's magic going out of control that caused the relationship between the two sides to deteriorate. Dake withdrew his gaze from the direction of the magic explosion and sighed. It seems that there are many dark horses among this year's candidates. Then he quickly changed the topic and asked the old gentleman, Mr. Oud, what happened to your sister? But Oscar Oud's face was somewhat stiff, and he blurted out, My sister exploded. Dake, huh? Although Oscar Oud was once a border count, he was not a pure blood. This was often criticized in the circle of nobles in the past. But when Oscar Oud resisted the most ferocious wave of attack in the history of the demon race with the power of the entire realm decades ago, no one dared to say a word about it anymore. Although old, Oscar Oud was still handsome, and had a noble father and an elven mother. Like Professor Shi-Erfu, he was a half-elf. But his elven blood was not thick, and he did not even inherit the elf's trademark long ears. From his appearance, he was completely an ordinary human. It had to be said that this was a fortunate thing for him, because his elven mother was originally a prisoner of war, and was a dark elf who relied on the demon race. This was also the reason why Oscar Oud did not continue to be active in the political circle of the kingdom after the border fell. He was tired of the endless war and chose to temporarily retire. The Oud family had now moved to the northwest of the kingdom, between the Shungmalian Academy in the north and the demon race's territory in the west, and had been recuperating. Then, is your sister also a half-elf? That's not it. In the face of Dake's curiosity, Oscar Oud was very amiable. Probably because Yvette's position on the demi-humans and half-elves had always been very clear, he did not avoid the topic when he explained. So he said, My sister, she is a pure-blood elf. 2 in 1 4,000 plus, requesting votes. Chapter 527. The Vampire's Daughter and the Phoenix Girl were lucky enough to be assigned to the same classroom. The two magic elves were only separated by a small path, so they could see each other as soon as they turned their heads. With such a close distance between them, the tension between the two was slightly relieved. Obviously, magic elves were not nervous in battle, but outside of battle, it was hard to explain. It was as if their courage was all in battle. But thinking about it carefully, it was normal. After all, in the Magister's knowledge, magic elves were born for battle. And the magic elves that were born in response to the Magister's expectations were naturally not afraid of battle. As the candidates in the classroom gradually arrived, a professor holding a test paper walked in. Shungmalian Academy's entrance exam only had 2 parts. One was the written exam. 1 second to memorize https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. The other was the interview. In fact, the only part that the candidates could grasp was the written exam. As for the interview, it was completely different from the traditional interview. It did not rely on eloquence, psychological quality, and so on to determine the score. The professors would interview the candidates in their own way, and then give their evaluation. There was no good or excellent in the interview, only pass or fail. Only by passing the written exam, and the interview could one enter the final selection. The academy would select a corresponding number of candidates according to their order. As the professor walked into the classroom, the candidates instantly quieted down. He first looked around and then said, "It's now 8:25. There are still 5 minutes before the written test begins. I will distribute the test papers to everyone in these 5 minutes, but before the bell rings, you can only fill in your name and test number. After the exam begins, you have 3 hours to answer the questions. The exam will end at 11:30. During this time, if anyone wants to go to the toilet, you can raise your hand." Seeing that no one was speaking, the professor turned around and wrote the exam time on the blackboard. Then he waited for half a minute, suddenly took out his magic wand and waved it. The test paper on the podium seemed to turn into a paper snake. One by one, it flew to every candidate in the audience. When the test paper fell, the candidates hurriedly opened it, fighting for every minute and every second to check it. The vampire's daughter and the phoenix girl had both been personally taught by Dake. The two of them filled in their names and exam numbers as soon as they received the exam papers. Then, they flipped through the papers to memorize the types of questions before starting from the beginning. They tried to solve 1 or 2 more questions before the exam bell rang. First question. Let's say you have 12 apples and need to share them with 2 brothers, so that everyone gets the same number of apples. Question. How many apples can each person get? The vampire's daughter couldn't help but blink. Then, she abruptly looked at the second question. For the second question, please use dual and smile to make a sentence. Ding-ling-ling. As the exam bell rang, the vampire's daughter immediately picked up her pen and scribbled furiously. The overly simple question made the nervousness in her heart disappear without a trace. On the other side, Phoenix Maiden had the same feeling. However, they didn't realize the meaning of this exam. The exam time is 3 hours, and there are 1,000 questions. The difficulty of the questions is from easy to difficult. In the waiting room, Dake and the others finally got some confidential information related to the exam questions from the staff. The score for each question increases according to the difficulty. It's almost impossible to get full marks on this kind of exam paper. It's a test of answering speed and mastery of basic knowledge at the same time. Dake gradually understood. Claire also nodded and said, "The speed of thinking is indeed very important to a magus. Moreover, this kind of long-term exam has high requirements for the examinee's concentration and concentration. Very few people can maintain concentration for 3 consecutive hours." If that's the case, Dake breathed a sigh of relief. After 2 consecutive months of continuous high-intensity learning and training, the vampire's daughter and Phoenix's concentration wouldn't be a problem. Moreover, their thinking speed was fast enough. As long as the difficulty of the questions was moderate, they could do it very quickly. The only problem was that the 2 magic guiding fairies were relatively careless. However, in the test mode of the exam, a little carelessness wasn't too important. The more you did, the more you got right. The final result wouldn't be bad. However, just as he raised his head, he saw Oscar Aude's worried face. Without waiting for Dake to ask, the old man said with a bitter face, "It's over. Concentration is Vivian's biggest weakness." Pure-blooded dark elf, Vivian Alvind. She was the child of Oscar Aude's dark elf mother, Alvind, who used forbidden magic to give birth to. In the era when the demons were basically wiped out, the dark elves attached to the demons naturally fell with them. However, the dark elves were a branch of the fairies. Apart from the magical fairies who were demonized, the rest didn't belong to the demons. Therefore, after the demons were wiped out, the dark elves scattered all over the world weren't pursued. However, this didn't change the fact that the dark elf race was on the verge of extinction. Therefore, the continuation of the bloodline became the most important mission of every surviving dark elf. Oscar Aude's dark elf mother became the most respected person in the Aude family after his father died of old age. Not long after the war ended, she began to search for the lost dark elves and set foot on the road to the revival of the race. For a branch of the elf race, the most important thing wasn't the elf queen, but the elf priest. The elf priest could communicate with the elemental fairies everywhere, and rely on the elemental fairies to create the fairy spring. The fairy spring was also known as the elemental spring water. Depending on the type of element, the effect of the spring water would be different. However, the most basic effect was the same. The pure fairy spring water could help the elves obtain a better elemental affinity and promote the growth of their magic power. Generally speaking, this was the basic method for the elves to increase their magic power. This made the elves' magic power much higher than humans who could only rely on the natural growth of their magic power. The same fairy spring water could increase the upper limit of their magic power when consumed by elves, but humans could only use it to recover their magic power. In short, if the dark elf race wanted to revive, they must first cultivate a dark elf priest. Oscar Oud's sister was born with this goal in mind. However, Oscar Oud's mother was originally a prisoner of war and didn't have a high position in the dark elf race. Therefore, she didn't come into contact with too many secrets. In order to be able to hatch the dark elf priest's egg, she used the Oud family's power to collect as much information as possible. Then, at the cost of 1/3 of her own life force, she finally refined a semi-finished product. The reason why it was called a semi-finished product was because although Vivian Alvind had the elemental affinity and magic talent to become a dark elf priest, she still lacked the ability to control magic power. Ever since she was born, there would often be sounds of magic explosions in the castle of the Oud family. She was a very reckless person. The Oud family sent her to the Shungmalian Academy because they wanted her to learn how to control magic power in the Shungmalian Academy, so that she could further learn how to create the Dark Elf Spring. As for why they didn't send her to the Elven Magic Academy, naturally it was because the Dark Elves were a traitor race. In the classroom next to the vampires, the Dark Elf girl who had just created the magic explosion was currently working hard to answer questions. In order to not let her affect the other students, the Academy specially put a layer of cover on her body. Despite receiving such special treatment, Vivian didn't have time to care. It was because her mother secretly gave her a death order. If you can't pass, go back to the furnace. In the whole castle there were many candidates like her who were under heavy pressure. With the passing of time, the atmosphere in every classroom became heavier and heavier. The royal orc who abandoned the Orcs' War Totem Academy and came from afar was also gnashing his teeth at the moment. It was as if he was fighting with a dragon beast. As for the parents in the waiting room, they were welcomed by the Academy's warm hospitality. Dake and Claire, who hadn't enjoyed the cooking of the halfling chef for a long time, chatted with Oscar Oud while waiting for the end of the exam. 3 hours, every second felt like a year. When the bell that signaled the end of the exam suddenly rang, the candidates who were immersed in their thoughts were startled and jumped up. "Candidates, please put down your pens. Otherwise, you will be punished for cheating." The voice of the invigilator entered everyone's ears, and those who wanted to put down their pens were instantly stunned. Wah! The vampire Missy lay on the table like a puddle of paste. The large blank sections at the end of the exam paper made her feel unusually desperate. The questions were so simple at the beginning, so why were they so difficult at the end? The professor who designed the exam didn't think that the students could solve the questions that they couldn't solve with such an arrangement, right? No, they would only be cooked like frogs. The vampire Missy turned her head slightly and saw steam rising from the Phoenix girl's head. She lowered her eyelids and realized that both of them were finished. When Dake reunited with the two magic elves, it was already noon. The Shungmalian Academy's cafeteria was open to the public, but today's lunch was free. Parents and candidates gathered in the cafeteria, discussing the written exam. Their voices were as noisy as firecrackers. Dark familiarly chose a table for 8 people and sat down, including Oscar Oud and his sister Vivian Alvind. The group of people just happened to fill up all the seats. As for the pitiful dragon tamers, they naturally didn't enter the academy in the first place. As the students who failed the entrance test, this was the second time Eve and Aaron came to the academy's cafeteria. Both of them couldn't help but sigh at the sight of the cafeteria. If they entered the academy successfully, they would be seniors 2 years older than Dake. If that happened, many things would be different. But there was nothing bad about their current lives. After Oscar Oud sat down, he introduced his younger sister passionately. The pure-blooded dark elf matched the standard impression of dark elves in terms of appearance. He had grayish-white hair that leaned towards the dark color, smooth wheat-colored skin, long pointed ears and slightly long corners of his eyes. He had a perfect V-shaped face, and his eyes were dual-colored pupils that could switch between pitch black and scarlet at will. Dark, cold, cunning, and oppressive. These were the inherent impressions of dark elves. If it weren't for Oscar Aude, who betrayed her completely during their conversation, no one would have thought that this cold young lady was a rash person who exceeded the common concept. Oscar Aude's enthusiasm was naturally due to the fact that he wanted Dake to take care of her after she entered the academy. However, when Dark counted with his fingers, he realized that the number of juniors he needed to take care of seemed to be a little too much. No matter if it was the 2 magic elves, Aurora, the 2 little princesses, or the siblings John and Joey who received the invitation, all of them required his care. Even though the 2 of them might not want his care, Dake felt that he was duty-bound as the future head of the Dimming family. Fine. Dake's mind spun. If this dark elf could successfully enter the academy, she would probably be assigned to the same courtyard as the vampire and phoenix girls. As a foreign race, they wouldn't be assigned to the House of Nobles. If they continued to grow, perhaps they would become powerful opponents of the House of Nobles. All in all, if the vampire and phoenix girls could build a good relationship with the dark elf, they would have a reliable trio. Starting from the 2nd year of the Shungmalian Academy, most of the extracurricular homework was done in groups. Of course, Dake didn't want any random people to join his darlings group. This dark elf girl was just right. While Dake was sizing up Vivian, Vivian was also sizing him up. Her cold and aloof appearance complemented the Phoenix maiden very well. Indeed, a perfect match. Dake suddenly noticed that among the 3 of them, the vampire who looked the youngest was the most reliable one. If this was the case, it would greatly train her temperament. Only with pressure would there be improvement. Dake, are you listening to me? The vampire girl knocked on the plate hard and looked anxious as if she was about to cry. Yes, I'm listening. Dake looked up and asked, What's wrong? The vampire girl suddenly opened her mouth and said, That test paper, I have a lot of empty space. Is it because I can't pass it? Dake turned his eyes and saw the phoenix girl staring at him with red eyes. He couldn't help but say, No problem as long as the others do worse than you. Bang. Magic power suddenly surged out of the dark elf girl's fork, and the steak on the plate suddenly let out an explosive sound, and the entire piece of steak turned into charcoal. Oscar Aude laughed dryly and quickly held the dark elf girl's shoulder to comfort her. No problem, good girl. You've worked so hard. You'll definitely do well. Maybe it was because of the explosion, but there were suddenly a lot of crying sounds in the cafeteria, and a sad atmosphere suddenly filled the cafeteria. At 2:00 in the afternoon, the interview session started as scheduled. The candidates who hadn't recovered from the cruel written exam had to line up to enter the examination room. The vampire girl and the phoenix girl were assigned to the same group again. The 2 held hands and found the classroom with the corresponding exam number, and then waited nervously. The vampire girl didn't enter the classroom until her number was called. There were a total of 3 professors on the podium in the classroom, and the candidates who had just finished the interview were leaving through the back door. The vampire's daughter swallowed her saliva and followed the other 2 candidates. Everyone, go to the podium to receive a card. One of the professors said amiably. The 3 candidates went up to receive their cards one by one. The professors seemed to be aware of the vampire girl's existence and didn't pay too much attention to her. After the 3 candidates had received their cards and returned to their seats, he continued to say, Press your left index finger on the fingerprint at the corner of the card, and then observe the changes on the card. You have 3 minutes to organize your thoughts, and after 3 minutes, explain what you saw. You can use the pen and paper on the table at will. The 3 candidates immediately put the cards on the table and held them down, picked up the pens and stared at the cards nervously. The 3 professors on the podium observed the changes in the breath of the 3 candidates respectively. The interview assessment was different every year, and this year seemed to be especially different. The vampire girl pursed her lips and stared at the card fiercely. The shape of the card was exactly the same as the magic card, but the surface of the card was blank, and there was only a fingerprint at the bottom left corner. After pressing her left index finger on it, there was a weak suction force from it. The vampire girl had already learned how to sense and transmit magic under Dake's guidance, and when the suction force appeared, she immediately felt it. She immediately calmed down and took the initiative to inject more magic into the card. Then, the surface of the card rippled with a gorgeous pattern. Then, the ripples suddenly rolled, as if there were petals emerging from it, and then a rose formed by water broke through the surface of the water and slowly floated up. The vampire girl couldn't help but open her eyes wide. The three professors on the podium also looked over. The cards they distributed to the candidates were a special magic tool, which absorbed the magic of the contactor for analysis, and then presented an image on the surface of the card. The more complex, complete, and regular the image, the higher the talent of the contactor. And to be able to directly conjure a physical object was an extremely outstanding talent. Therefore, the vampire girl didn't need to elaborate, and the professor in charge of her directly marked her name with a. Not long after, the Phoenix girl also entered the classroom. After she pressed her finger on the bottom left corner of the card, an orange-red flame suddenly burst out from the card, and then a palm-sized phoenix quickly flew out with a long cry. When she walked out from the back, there was a happy expression on her face. After the two magic fairies met, they happily clapped their hands. Even if they didn't know the standards of the assessment, they knew that they would definitely pass this interview. But just as they were about to find Dake to tell him the good news, there was a sudden explosion in the classroom next door. Boom! 2 and 5 and 1, 5,000 plus. The chapters are finally back. If you encounter a situation where there are missing chapters, refresh the table of contents. If refreshing the table of contents doesn't work, delete the book first and then add it back to the bookshelf. That's all. Oh, asterisk greater than over equal to asterisk, asterisk forward slash. Chapter 528. It's so lively. Maybe this is youth. Youth is art, and art is explosions. As the parents whispered to each other, the candidates who had completed their interviews walked out of the examination room one after another. Some people were at a loss, while others were overflowing with confidence. The candidates' states differed greatly. Dake was talking to Oscar out about the source of the explosion when he suddenly saw a pink skull in the crowd. He was immediately energized. They're out. The vampire's daughter, Phoenix girl, and the dark elf girl walked out together. The two magic elves didn't want to wait for the dark elf girl, but the explosion made them realize that the dark elf girl's examination was about to end, so they waited for a while. Website. https://m, VIP can't you? VIP. The three girls walking together, each with their own merits, attracted a lot of attention. Compared to the depression they felt when the written examination ended, they were clearly much more relaxed now. When she found Dake in the crowd, the vampire's daughter couldn't help but quicken her pace. She was like a swallow returning to its nest, very eager to tell Dake the results of the interview. Dake saw their expressions and relaxed. He opened his arms to catch her. Did you do well? Of course. The vampire's daughter blew her nose. Then she was anxious to say all the details out loud. Dake smiled and said, let's go back and talk. The vampire's daughter shut her mouth. Dake grabbed Phoenix girl's hand, not caring about the fact that they were about the same age. He pulled her over and asked, how was it? The corner of Phoenix girl's mouth raised slightly, then she nodded. That's good. Dark heaved a sigh of relief. Although the two magic elves didn't have much confidence in their written examination results, Dake was quite optimistic. In fact, the real deciding factor of whether the two magic elves could enter the school was the interview. If they didn't have the talent for magic and were forced into the school, they wouldn't be happy. Now that the interview segment was set, it was basically a done deal. He turned to look at the Ode siblings, only to find the dark elf girl clutching tightly onto Oscar Ode's clothes. Her lips pursed into a thin line. Vivian Alvand was obviously anxious about losing control of her magic during the interview again. However, Oscar Aud comforted her with a happy face after hearing her words. The two siblings, who were at least 50 years apart in age, exuded warmth. The final results of the entrance test will be announced on the evening of August 16th, or in the morning of August 17th. At that time, the Academy would write the names and test numbers of the people who passed the test on the bulletin board of the Academy town. Those who didn't pass but wanted to know the results could go to the staff to ask. The staff will distribute the results according to the examination number. As for those who passed the test, the invitation letters would be distributed to everyone within 10 days. If there are special circumstances where you do not receive an invitation letter, the school hopes that students will not forget to register on time on September 1st. After Dake's group left the academy, they found a restaurant in the academy town to celebrate their successful entrance test. The two families ate and chatted together, which improved their friendship. As for the vampire Missy and Phoenix girl, they had also become more familiar with the dark elf girl. After the meal, the two families strolled through the night market, left their blessings, and agreed to meet at the bulletin board. The next morning, Dake entrusted the two magic elves to the 3 dragon tamer guards and entered the academy with Claire, Eve, and Aaron to meet with the person in charge of external affairs. Then they discussed the matters of the duel game in further detail. This cooperation didn't seem complicated in terms of terms, and both parties were more modest in the distribution of benefits. The matters that needed to be discussed were the specific rules of the duel game, the drafting of the first set of cards, and the rental of shops on Travelers Street. On the other hand, Dake had a clear idea of the rules of the duel game. In view of the fact that both parties needed a quick communication channel, the rental of the shops was quickly confirmed. As the best liaisons, Eve and Aaron would work in the shops on Travelers Street in shifts. Apart from the weekends, they could choose 1 or 2 elective classes to listen in. Even though it wasn't the main course, the Shungmalian Academy had a wide variety of elective classes, and they were very useful. Moreover, with the elective qualifications, it meant that the resources of the library, Underground City, and Travelers Street would be accessible to them. This was something all archmages yearned for even in their dreams. It was all thanks to Dake, the designer of the Easter egg, that they were able to apply for the qualification to listen in. It was apparent that Eve and Aaron were overjoyed. The failure of the entrance test 2 years ago had always been a thorn in their hearts. Now it was finally alleviated. The twins were more grateful to their young master, who made this suggestion than before. However, the most important and time-consuming part of the entire discussion was the drafting of the first set of cards. The attractiveness of the first set of cards would basically determine the competitiveness of the duel game and magic chess. After all, before the game was popularized, the duel game's counterpart was magic chess. The final results of the entrance test didn't come out on the evening of the 16th. After 8 o'clock in the evening, the parents of the candidates who were waiting in the plaza all returned. Not long after, a 2-meter-tall magic door lit up in the teleportation plaza. Dake and the others walked out from it. After an entire day of discussion, Dake felt a little tired. He looked up at the moon floating in the clouds and couldn't help but smile. The entire discussion went smoothly, but it would take a few more days to finish. Dake lowered his head and turned to look at the bulletin board. He suddenly said, "Oh right, I forgot to ask the professors about the entrance test results." Carr said casually, "Not tonight, but tomorrow morning. You'll know when you wake up." "That's true." Dake nodded. "It'll pass eventually." Then the two of them walked out of the plaza. Eve and Aaron followed closely behind. After a few minutes, Dake seemed to have just remembered something. He asked casually, "Sister Eve and Sister Aaron, have you thought about which elective class you want to listen in on?" Eve smiled sweetly. "I'm still thinking about it." Aaron also said, "We have to see what courses we can choose first." Dake said, "Then I'll ask the professors to make a list of elective classes?" Eve was pleasantly surprised. "Can I?" Dake nodded. "Of course you can. I'm going to take an elective next semester, so I can take a look. However, many of the elective classes in the academy have prerequisites. Try to think about it carefully." Eve and Aaron nodded repeatedly. They soon returned to their residence. Dake opened the door and saw the vampire and Phoenix staring at each other on the bed. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "What are you doing?" The vampire's daughter mumbled, "I want to see how others see me." Dake. After staring at the vampire's back for half a second, Dake decisively turned around and ignored her. At the same time, he felt a twinge of pain in his heart, because he suddenly realized that his baby seemed to be developing in the direction of amusing. But after he ignored the vampire's daughter, she climbed off the bed and hung on his arm, looking up into his eyes. Dake said helplessly, "What's wrong now?" The vampire's daughter couldn't help but ask, "What if I don't get in?" Dake comforted her. "You won't." The vampire's daughter said coquettishly, "Why won't you? Just tell me what you'll do." Dake thought for a moment and said, "Then you can be an auditing student." Auditing student? The vampire's daughter's eyes lit up. The same as Ivan? She had envied Ivan when they were in the academy. It wouldn't be bad if she could be an auditing student like Ivan. As she thought about it, the vampire's daughter glanced at Phoenix and her expression froze. How embarrassing would it be if her sister got in and she didn't? No, I can't be an auditing student. I want to enroll." She shook her head vigorously and became nervous again. Dake opened his mouth but didn't continue. Even if the vampire's daughter didn't pass the entrance test, he still had a way. But he couldn't let a child learn the bad habit of taking the back door. So before the results came out, it was better not to say anything. Then that night, the two magic guiding fairies didn't sleep at all. When the first ray of morning light penetrated the window and shone into the room on the 17th of August, Dake opened his eyes under the urging of his biological clock. He knew that the vampire's daughter and Phoenix definitely didn't sleep well. But thanks to the fact that magic guiding fairies didn't really need to sleep, their energy wasn't too bad. He always thought that being so nervous that you can't sleep at night was also a part of life experience, so he didn't adopt the strategy of forcing sleep. "Anyway, let's go eat a good meal first, then go to the teleportation square to wait for the results to be announced." According to the usual pattern, the final results will be announced before 9 o'clock in the morning. Dake opened the door and walked out of the room. The vampire's daughter grabbed his arm tightly, her fingers trembling. This psychological quality, it's hopeless. Sighing in his heart, Dake rubbed her head with his other hand to make her relax. He tried to divert her attention with delicious food. "How about tomato sauce today?" The vampire's daughter subconsciously retorted. "How can you just eat sauce?" Dake shrugged. "Then small diced tomatoes with big slices of tomatoes dipped in tomato sauce?" The vampire's daughter pouted. "Why are they all tomatoes?" Dake said. "Because you like tomatoes." The vampire's daughter suddenly felt a little happy. "Hey." After picking up Phoenix and the twins from another room, the group of people went to the restaurant in a grandiose manner. There were a lot of people who got up early to eat today, and they were all very fast, leaving as soon as they finished eating. Obviously, everyone wanted to know the results of the entrance test as soon as possible. However, the so-called thousands of soldiers and horses crossing a single plank bridge meant that only a small group of people could pass within a limited time. The rest of the people could only look on and sigh. Dake Demung, who had experienced the cruelty of the high school entrance exam, college entrance exam, and public exam, was used to this. 7:30 in the morning. Dake brought everyone to the teleportation square much later than the others. At this time, the teleportation square was already overcrowded, especially around the bulletin board. Dake had no intention of squeezing through the crowd. Instead, he looked around for Oscar Odd's figure, and finally found the dark elf girl in a shady corner. And Oscar Odd was naturally beside her. "Let's go over there and take a look." Dake pulled the vampire's daughter and led the way. The two families soon met. Dake immediately noticed that the siblings, who had a huge age difference, had thick dark circles under their eyes. As the saying goes, concern makes one confused. Obviously, even Oscar Odd, the former border count, did not sleep well. The two families chatted in the corner for half an hour, and the portal to the Shungmalian Academy finally appeared. Seeing the staff walk out with a roll of paper, the atmosphere in the square suddenly became lively. A large number of people began to surge in the direction of the bulletin board. The staff looked at the seamless crowd and shook his head helplessly. He raised his hand and activated a flight spell. He flew through the crowd from the sky and landed in front of the bulletin board. Obviously, after so many years, the Academy had a lot of experience in putting up announcements. Everyone, don't be anxious. What you should have will always be there, and what you don't have can't be rushed. After the staff member said this slowly, he pasted the notice in his hand. Then he pointed to the back of the crowd and said, "The names on the list are arranged according to the size of the exam number. Follow the number, and you will see if your name is on it. If you want to know the details of your score, please go over there." More staff had already set up tables and chairs on the other side of the square. The crowd surged from there. The people who had finished reading the announcement turned from the side and rushed to the back of the office. The space they had vacated was filled in the blink of an eye. Then more and more people rushed to the inquiry office. Whether it was the ecstatic people or the dissatisfied people, they all wanted to know the results, especially the ranking. But the staff only had the results of the written exam, which might disappoint some people. Dake originally wanted to wait until there were fewer people before checking, but Oscar Out obviously couldn't wait. It was the same for his two magic elves. Helpless, he could only lead the charge and squeeze into the crowd. After a full 15 minutes, he finally squeezed to the front of the bulletin board and saw Victoria Diming's name at first glance. Immediately after, Phoenix Diming's name was also very conspicuous. Dake's expression didn't change, but in his heart he exhaled fiercely. The smooth passing of the entrance test was, on the one hand, the victory of the vampire's daughter and Phoenix girl, and on the other hand, it was also the victory of the education method. The others didn't seem to be able to find the names at a glance like him, and were still counting from top to bottom. Dake took the time to summon the magician's secretary, and got it to record the entire form. Just as the magician's secretary finished recording the information, the vampire's daughter's surprised voice suddenly sounded. "Found it! Victoria, Victoria, it's me, it's me." She literally leaped 3 feet into the air. Then the temperature of the area suddenly rose. Dake turned around abruptly and saw Phoenix Girl's cheeks blushing. Her red hair was like a flame, as if it was going to burn immediately. He quickly pressed down on Phoenix Girl's shoulder and calmed her down. On the other side, Oscar Out, who was ecstatic, also hurriedly hugged Vivian Alvind into his arms. Dark could clearly feel the mana fluctuations quickly calming down as they surged. Obviously, the siblings also found the name Vivian Alvind on the bulletin board. "Congratulations to you. Congratulations to you too. Congratulations to you too." The two families walked out from the side under the urging of the staff, and then prepared to line up at the information desk. It was normal for people to want to know the ranking, and of course, they were no exception. Fortunately, there were enough staff at the information desk. They only spent less than half an hour to get the specific report card. There are 81 candidates who passed the entrance test this year, plus the 88 who were actively recruited by the Academy. There are 169 candidates. Dake quickly calculated and first looked at the report card of the vampire's daughter. Exam number, 0398. Name, Victoria Diming, written test, 621 points, rank 53. Interview pass, 53rd place, low flying. After Dake finished reading, he handed the report card to Claire, and then looked at Phoenix Girl's report card. Exam number, 0410. Name, Phoenix Diming, written test, 613 points, rank 55. Interview pass, only 2 places away. It seems that Phoenix Girl is also very hardworking. Dake couldn't help but praise. Then he turned to look at Oscar Out and asked curiously, "How many points did Vivian get in the written test?" Oscar Out frowned slightly and said, "It's a little worse than expected, 765 points, 13th place." Dake Diming, who was secretly proud of himself, suddenly opened his mouth wide. Then he couldn't help but look at the dark elf girl. The dark elf who almost cried after the exam was obviously a lot more relaxed now. Dake nudged Out and couldn't help but ask, "This is the sister you said can't concentrate well?" But Versailles Out replied seriously, "If she can concentrate well, With her academic ability, she should be able to compete for first place. Dake. Fine. After all, she was a treasure cultivated by a large family for 12 years. If the dark elf girl really failed, it would be a miracle. The vampire's daughter and phoenix girl didn't have much competitive spirit. They couldn't close their mouths after knowing that they had passed, and were now dancing hand in hand. Now that the three of them had passed the entrance test, each of them had a bright future. Thinking that in half a month, they would be able to participate in the division ceremony together, they couldn't help but feel happy. Roar! The sudden sound of a lion's roar interrupted their conversation. The gray-haired orc couldn't help but roar in excitement, and became the center of attention in the blink of an eye. Is this also a student who is going to be admitted this year? Oscar frowned. Dake opened the magic guidebook, and said, "It's one of the royal orc families. It seems that he passed the test." Oscar frowned. Why would a royal orc apply to the Shungmalian Academy? Dake shrugged. There's always a reason. How about it, are you going back directly? Oscar turned his head and said, "Yes. If we leave now, we might be able to make it in time for dinner." Dake smiled. "Then I won't disturb you from reporting the good news." Olus said, "Then see you in September." Dake, "See you in September." Oscar then held Vivian's hand and left the square. On the other hand, Dark brought the two magic elves and entered the academy through the teleportation gate. The success of the vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter could be said to have put down the heavy stone in his heart. Next, he could focus on the design of the first set of cards. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, 3 or 4 days had passed. During this period, Dake successfully completed the design of the first set of 99 cards by himself, which made the person in charge gasp in amazement. Professor Kazair, who received the task on the night of the 16th, only spent 3 days to make the preliminary card template and the prototype of the dual disc. That speed was even faster than Wuling Hongguang. Dake couldn't help but praise after trying it out. Professor Kazair was really a god. Apart from the fact that he hadn't designed the charging card yet, the dual disc he made was perfect. In this aspect, Dake only provided an idea and appearance. He couldn't help but imagine that if Professor Kazair knew the structure of cars and airplanes, would he be able to create magic cars and airplanes soon? Maybe I can choose Professor Kazair's alchemy as one of the electives for the second year? Although Dake wanted to stay in the academy and wait for Professor Kazair's final product to be born, he chose to leave after completing the design of the first set of cards. August 21st. 4 flying dragons took off from the Shungmalian Academy's dragon-taming platform. After a day of flying, they finally arrived at the Duke's mansion before sunset. Dake first settled the ashen-faced twins down, then immediately conveyed the good news to Yvette. Madam Cook, who was chatting with Yvette, also heard the good news. If it weren't for the sensitive identity of the two magic elves, Yvette would have held a celebratory banquet in the mansion. However, a big banquet couldn't be held, so a family banquet could be held casually. Ollie worked overtime that night to prepare a banquet. The vampire's daughter and the phoenix's daughter were surrounded by stars. For the first time in their lives, they tasted the joy of achieving great success through their own efforts. After a night, everyone in the Duke's mansion was busy. Claire needed to start work on the cooperation agreement, and the recruitment of staff was especially important. These weren't the core staff, and they didn't all need to be magisters. The maids in the Duke's mansion were ready-made resources. Claire began to carefully select and look for talents. As for Eve and Aaron, they accepted the task of making notebooks with the leaves of the tree of Diesel. These notebooks, named photocopies, would be the first product of the nationwide Dual Club Academy branch. From the design to the price of the notebooks, everything had to be carefully determined. The magic elves couldn't escape the clutches of the devil. The 4 tutors rubbed their palms and prepared to teach them something other than basic knowledge in the next 10 days. Whether it was magic, fighting, music, chess, calligraphy, or painting, it would bring new joy to them. At the same time, Dake finally began his final sprint. It was only 10 days before the start of school on September 1st. He still had 3 experiments that he hadn't completed yet. Among them, There was still no clue about the pride experiment. Every time he thought about it, he couldn't help but hesitate. But at this point he had no choice. If he didn't give it a try, how could he find the crux of the problem? It was impossible to create a pavilion out of thin air just by relying on the power of I think. But rice had to be eaten mouthful by mouthful, and the road had to be taken step by step. Of the 3 experiments, he would start with the simplest one. Dake took a deep breath. He placed a thinking bottle filled with bliss, a gray stone from an Easter egg, a gem sealed with the blood of a fire elemental monster, a piece of magic steel, for magic crystal coins, and a water lizard's blood crystal. In addition, he also had a bloodthirsty greataxe that he obtained from the dungeon's boss, the 2-headed devil. This bloodthirsty greataxe had the effect of absorbing the user's vitality to stimulate its power. As a weapon, it could increase the attack by 1,000 points. But the side effect of absorbing vitality was too strong, so it wasn't practical even if it was refined into an equipment card. Especially when compared to the Holy Sword, it was particularly useless. In fact, Dake was prepared to throw the bloodthirsty greataxe into the Duke's mansion's warehouse to collect dust. In short, I'll first choose a part of the materials to refine the last magic fairy. Because I chose the fruit of bliss, its attributes will lean towards the fairy, evil, and dark elemental. And there are 5 types of catgrass. They are the orthodox catgrass, foxgrass, cowgrass, dragongrass, and liongrass. These can give the fruit of bliss the attributes of cat, fox, cow, dragon, and lion. Among the materials I have, the magic steel is to be used to refine armament, so I'll rule it out first. Then among the remaining materials, the most obvious characteristic is the water lizard's blood crystal. It can be used together with the dragon grass to refine a water dragon. The value of the magic crystal coins isn't high, if I don't want to refine a second meow meow. The gray stone and the gem sealed with the blood of a fire elemental monster have unknown characteristics. Maybe I need to spend some time to examine them instead of keeping them under the box. First, I'll start with this gray stone. Let's first determine what kind of monster's blood is sealed in that gem. Dake put down the gray stone and picked up the gem. The gray stone was drawn from the participation prize of the Easter Duel Festival. The gem sealed with the blood of a fire elemental monster was opened from the canteen's Easter egg. However, the gray stone looked like an ordinary stone that could be found anywhere. Dake couldn't identify it. If it wasn't opened from the Easter egg, it would have been thrown away. Thus, he could only start his research from the gem. What kind of magic fairy can I refine with the above materials? Waiting online urgent. Re. 5-in-1/7/100 plus. 147/233? Oh, begging for votes. The editing and illustration functions haven't been opened yet, so the wrong words can't be corrected and the pictures can't be posted. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.